about, are you recording, by the way, Rosa?
Yes,
Thank you so
we are.
much for that. We've got a pretty packed agenda. We've got about 2.5 to 3 hours of items on the agenda. I want to acknowledge that staff have been working behind the scenes to try to streamline their presentations and limit the length of various items tonight. But even with that, we're going to have a pretty heavy agenda, so do expect that timing tonight. And then with that, let's go to approving the agenda. So I'm actually gonna move to amend the agenda right from the get-go. I talked about this with Ally beforehand, but I'd like to approve the agenda with the amendment of removing one item. It's matter from the department, item C, which is the 2022 BPR plan implementation update. That's a non-urgent item that we can talk about at a later date. And just given the number of items on the agenda tonight, I think we can remove that. Is there any opposition to that? Okay, so anybody want to move to approve the agenda with that amendment? Move. Second, thank you, Jenny. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, agenda is approved. All right, so future board items and tours, and hand it over to Ally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Folks, I'm Ally Rhodes. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation. And given the length of the meeting, I'll be really brief in this, just to call out that next month is your annual capital projects tour. For new board members, that's when we actually all hop in a van and we take you to some of the sites where we either have projects underway or projects upcoming so that we can on the land talk to you about what's coming. We find it really helpful to be with you and have those opportunities to ask questions. That is a study session format, so the public is welcome to visit the tour at different locations, but there's not public participation. We'll have published that tour schedule and the locations. Later in the meeting, you have an item about the scheduling of that under matters from the board that we'd love your input on that. Other than that, we always welcome your input on the items calendared for the board, and they're outlaid for you here in that 3-month format so that you can give input on items that are coming.
Thank you, Ally. Any questions from the board on that? Okay, moving along. Okay, so do we have anybody signed up for public participation? Okay, so would anybody present like to use this time to present public participation or comment? Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think we can then skip that item. So let's move on to the consent agenda, which includes, I'll just remind people, approval of the minutes from the prior meeting as well as updates from the department. So when we do our vote, which means we're going to move for approval and the second, we'll have a discussion. That's when we can ask questions and we can offer amendments to the minutes from the previous meeting. Okay, so do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Jenny, thank you. Second? Second. Okay, tie between Sunny and I'll go with Bernie because he was here first. As a second. Any discussion on the consent agenda items, which includes approval of the minutes, as well as the updates from the department? I have just 1 or 2 questions related to the, oh, you know what? This is related to the budget, so I have no comments or questions on the updates.
I just had a comment about the Boulder Creek signage. Is this the right time for that?
Yeah,
I just wanted to say thanks. We had had a discussion about this month before last. Talking about Boulder Creek and how to implement some sort of a flag program and how the county would help with that. In the meantime, I see these signs have gone up and I just wanted to say thank you to the department for taking proactive measures to protect the community.
thank you. Okay, any other questions, discussion? All right, I'm gonna abstain from this vote because I wasn't here during the last meeting, so I can't really say what was discussed during the meeting. So, but I will ask for, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed? Okay, so the consent agenda is approved, which means the minutes are approved from the last meeting, and Rosie, you can send me those to sign. Okay, and then moving right along to action items, we actually have an action item this evening, which has to do with public hearing on the consideration of a motion to recommend the 2025 proposed budget and the 2025 through 2030 proposed capital investment program. And I'll hand it over to Ally.
Sure. This item is going to be presented to you by our incredible budget leads, Jackson Height, Stacy Hoffman. Jackson is our senior manager for business services. Thinking about Stacy Hoffman, trying to be succinct and not too fast. I just want to acknowledge the amount of work that goes into budget development. And while it takes staff all over the department, Jackson and Stacy just do an incredible job giving our folks tools and information and providing analysis to do it well. And I appreciate that. I also want to acknowledge the new members of PRAB, Waylon, Jenny, and Eric. It is so hard to come in as a board member right in the midst of budget because you haven't had the onboarding yet, the breadth of the department, the services we provide. And I recognize how frustrating it might feel to jump into the way deep end of this budget pool. And just appreciate you bearing with us and know that we've been listening so hard to your comments and questions. And not all of the things can be responded to or addressed overnight, but we are listening carefully and look forward to doing better in future years.
Thank you, Ally. Jackson Heights. I'm going to run us through a quick presentation tonight. As you know, we have been talking about the budget since March. So for those of you who've been on the board the whole time, thank you. For the new members, even more thank you. I know it is hard to come in mid-process. The Boulder Municipal Code does have 3 different suggested motions in it that you'll be approving tonight. So those are listed in the packet, and we'll have them on the last slide. I want to just acknowledge that this has been a multi-month process. And while this board engagement will be wrapping up tonight, it will continue through an additional engagement process. So it's going through the executive budget team review, then it will go through planning board and city council. So by the end of October, we will have a fully adopted budget. And as Ally said, I recognize that there have been some common themes and feedback from the PRAB that we really appreciate. I know that at the beginning of the year, we said this was a fiscally constrained environment, and it really is. And I recognize that we haven't been able to accomplish everything that the PRAB was after. And that being said, we also have a lot of opportunities moving forward where you will hear from staff in September about some of our philanthropic opportunities, opportunities for donations, and then the more entrepreneurial aspects. So we do look forward to coming back and sharing that information with you. This budget does assume a lot of those philanthropic aspects still continue, and we are continuing to be more entrepreneurial. So this graphic you've seen before, we are at the far right-hand side. After tonight, we'll hop down to the bottom right corner. I'll talk you through what those next steps look like. The packet itself had 2 different scenarios, what we heard last month, as well as the staff recommendation scenario 2. And that really converts the Ranger program from a fixed term or a pilot program into ongoing funding. And this would include the 3 existing fixed term employees and then converting 3 temporary positions into 2 ongoing. We found that we have better coverage and consistency year round by having those 2 positions instead of needing to onboard 3 new temporary staff each year. There's a senior landscape architect that's currently fixed term that would be converted to ongoing. We addressed minimum wage and compression, hearing the feedback about competitive wages. We maintain current service levels, and then we have realigned CIP. We continue to focus on the projects that you're well aware of, but we have realigned budget from areas that we just did not have enough funding to really fully support. So with that, table 2 in the packet identifies the breakdown of funding. Let's minimize this. Far right-hand side shows the proposed 2025 budget at 43.9 million. You will see this is a decrease from 2024, and most of that is aligned to reductions in CIP or realignments that have occurred within the operating budget. This chart goes back to 2019, so you can see that during the pandemic, we really decreased our spending and then have increased slowly over time. And we've essentially reached a plateau as far as what's possible within the fiscally constrained budget. So the 43.9 million includes funding across multiple funds. As I mentioned, that's in table 2 in your packet. Looking at the capital side of things, the capital investment program identifies where we're going to be putting significant dollars into major capital investments. Capital investments have a lifespan of over 5 years and $50,000. This map really indicates from the 2022 department plan the areas of greatest need, and that's where we're trying to prioritize a lot of our capital projects. You can see at the top left corner, Violet Park, which was renamed to Primos Park last month, is an area that is significantly underserved and where we are continuing to invest dollars. In the center of the map is Boulder Junction. Mapleton and Boulder Junction Pocket Park are both slated for investment over the next 5 years. I'm not going to go into all of these, but really just hitting home that we are using racial equity tools to identify where investments are going. Throughout the entire budget process, we have looked at CIP and a breakdown by spend. Asset management aligns with the master plan theme of taking care of what we have, and you can see that that accounts for about 1/3 of our spend. The remaining 2/3 is really focused on parks and recreation facilities. These are major revamps of existing facilities. And then you can see we do have a small amount of funding for system planning, which is really to identify plans that will last 5 to 7 years and guide future investments. I will note that this slide and the subsequent slides do not include any of the CCRS funding. We'll talk about the CCRS funding a little differently. But looking at the 2025 proposed budget, you can see half the spend on the left-hand side is really associated with Parks and Recreation's dedicated funds. The remaining half is one-time funding that is supposed to go towards special projects, and these are dedicated funds with specific sources. So you can see that dedicated funding is supporting Boulder Junction. We have development impact fees supporting growth, Violet Park, and then we have CCRS for certain named projects that we'll talk about on a future slide. Looking across the 6-year CIP, we do budget for 6 years. We're really asking you to appropriate 2025 budget tonight. Everything else is kind of in pencil and allows our staff to plan accordingly, have opportunities for community engagement, and really seek those philanthropic donations, grant funding to further the dollars that we do have. You will see across the 6 years, there's 55.5 million dedicated towards CIP projects. And the full list of projects is included in attachment C in your packet. I did touch briefly on CCRS. CCRS was approved by voters in 2021, and this was really to focus on infrastructure tax as far as community priorities. The department received funding over the first tranche for 4 different projects. I think the 3 that are worth highlighting are the Civic Area Phase 2, the Pearl Street Mall refresh, and the Rec Center's future, with a significant investment at East Boulder communities. I know that we've talked on the fact that this budget doesn't accomplish everything, and the city is aware of this. We aren't the only department facing this challenge. City Council and the City Finance Department are working on a long-term financial strategy. This is a plan that's going to be laid out over the next 2 years or so, and focuses on a lot of things that the department has already done, such as the comprehensive fee study, but looking at this at a citywide level, seeing what our core service levels are, and then potentially seeking a ballot measure for additional funding. So that really wraps up where we've been. Later next week, we will have a budget review with our executive budget team, who is looking at all of the departments citywide to determine the best allocation of resources. By August 30th, the city manager's recommended budget will be released to the public. And then there are 3 different touches with City Council. The first one is a study session, and then there's a first reading and public hearing, followed by second reading and adoption. All funds would be available to spend starting on January 1st. And with that, we have 3 suggested motion languages for you, but I'm happy to take any questions.
So how often do the tranches of funding from the CCRS come in?
It was a 20-year funding. The funding really comes in annually. City Council chose to initiate a 5 to 7 year tranche for the first phase. The reason for that is they are going to bond against that, and That requires the city taking out a bond and then paying future payments on the bond. So this was the first tranche. I believe there's no limitation as far as when the next tranche can be issued, but most of the funding through 2030 has already been allocated for.
I had a question from something that was mentioned in the packet, which is that you say that without additional funding by 2027, we'll need to basically look at, what programs we keep. And that's kind of an ominous statement. And I'm wondering, and you also mentioned that city council is looking at kind of a comprehensive fee study citywide. And I'm wondering, to what extent can we as a department move on increasing fees or, doing other things that would improve our fiscal situation, aside from what city council does?
So last year, the PRAB adopted the fee policy. The fee policy sets cost recovery targets across the board. This is our first year where we've implemented it. You may recall last year we did updated fees. We will be coming back to you later this year to look at updated fees for 2025. With the fee policy, you've essentially set what our cost recovery targets are. So as expenses continue to increase year over year, we are going to have to increase the amount that we charge for those services.
So per the policies that we've established, we can increase fees consistent with those policies.
Correct.
And it doesn't matter if city council is looking at a comprehensive fee study, we can just increase those fees without waiting for them to approve.
They still have to go through a formal review process, but yes, the PRAB can increase those fees.
And then the other thing was related to the Pearl Street redo. It seems like the two projects you mentioned that were potentially going to receive less funding, or Pearl Street and the Reservoir South Shore improvements. And I'm wondering, given that, are we looking more purposefully for private funding for the Pearl Street redo, especially given the annual celebration that's coming up?
Mark, can you take that one?
You've kind of answered the question at the end, the celebration. When we're looking at the funding.
Do you mind introducing yourself?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Straight in there. It's so cozy tonight. Mark Davison, Senior Planning Manager. So we've got basic 3 million. That'll probably take care of emergency needs on the mall, like the bathrooms, for example. When I say emergency, like assets in poor condition.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, if we do the timing right, we'll hopefully can get like a schematic design. There's a plan in place by 26, and then that would allow us to sort of sell that plan as a concept to working with our partners through the mall to see if that can be a sort of fundraising campaign for the 50th. And we haven't gotten any of the details yet. We've just talked about it, but yeah, you hit the nail on the head that 50th was an opportunity.
And remind me when the 50th anniversary is.
2027.
Okay, it's coming up.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, anybody else have any questions? I'm sorry, I jumped in first.
I just want to share as an example that this is an area of deep study for the department. So we have all been looking at various precedents and case studies of examples where communities are working in partnership with their businesses to make the public realm better. Just recently on my own family vacation, we swung through Omaha where they leveraged a $50 million city investment into a $350 million improvements in their downtown water park and 3 parks, and figure if they can get a 5-to-1 return and we can turn 20 million in the civic area to 100 million, we'll be doing pretty good. So there's lots of great examples all over the country. To Elliot, your other question of what else we could do, it's fees, it's grants, it's philanthropy, but without all of that, it is. And this is not news. I just want to remind folks, and for the new board members, with the 2022 BPR plan, one of the things that you saw in your packet was just at that time, both PRAB, the planning board and council, in reviewing that, knew that without additional funding, we will have to reduce services. The cost escalation is outpacing revenue growth. And that's a reality we've known about. We've been working since then to address it. That's why we created a fee policy. It's why we have been working to realign our capital, and we have less shiny new and more focus on just taking care of what we have. It's not fun. It'd be a lot more fun to do it the other way, but I want to acknowledge that this isn't news, and we've been working really hard for several years to try and address this gap, and the work continues.
And I presume that if city council comes up with some, as part of their planning, some budget planning magic sauce over the next 5 years for how to fix the city's financial situation and it impacts our budget in a certain way, we would be apprised of that change.
I think you'd be consulted.
Any other questions? Eric, can you hear, I didn't even check on you when we started, but can you hear everything okay? Okay,
Yep, I hear you. Just fine.
okay, any questions from you at all?
No, thanks.
One question. Like, the Pearl Street Mall is sort of an unusual thing. Like, I imagine many cities or communities don't have the Pearl Street Mall under a Parks and Rec designation. Has there ever been any discussion about why that is staying? Like, this seems like such a huge investment that's not really a traditional Park and Rec area. It's more of a commerce thing. Like, could it be redesignated under a different umbrella and the city and the people who are, more involved in commerce, maybe taking more responsibility for the upkeep and for the programming in that area? I just feel like the traditional stuff is falling by the wayside. And
I think that's a really great question. It's important to note that most of the funding for Pearl Street Mall does not come from dedicated Parks and Recreation funding. So there is a business district, the Central Area General Improvement District, or CAGID. A lot of those dollars go towards the operations for the Pearl Street Mall. So the Downtown Boulder Partnership and the work that they do, that's all funded by CAGID. Major maintenance on the mall, often funded by CAGID. So there already is a mechanism by which the business community can help fund it because of the economic impacts of the Pearl Street Mall. I think, it's a significant portion of city sales tax revenue. And so I hear what you're saying. I think Sunny, is it accurate that you're saying that you think Parks and Recreation investments are falling at the wayside because of the need to take care of Pearl Street Mall? I understand that concern. I don't, because of those different funding mechanisms, I think it's okay. I think it's a good thing we work in close partnership with Community Vitality, the city manager's office. But at the end of the day, it is a public gathering space with incredible green spaces. And I think it's great that it is, owned, if you will, by Parks and Recreation, but the funding comes from lots of places and the decisions are made in very close partnership with the business community. Was that helpful? Did I answer your question?
Disappointing. I don't know. I just feel like it's a different beast.
Yeah.
than the Parks and Rec stuff, which we're looking at, like these rec centers that are falling apart and the tennis courts that we can't fund. And I just feel like that to me is my image of Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
Whereas the Pearl Street Mall, I don't frequent. I don't see my kids playing there. I don't feel like it really contributes to mental and physical health or environmental anything. So it just feels like a different category to me. And so I was just curious how that ended up under Parks and Rec and if indeed a lot of money is going there, but it sounds like it's not a huge amount, but it just feels like.
And as Jackson pointed out, it's the CCRS tax is what's funding it, that isn't parks funding, and then Community Vitality is funding the other part. And you'll see when the project comes forward, as Ali pointed out, it'll be Community Vitality, Climate Initiative, City Manager's Office. We all work together for the different responsibilities, and we do have the park civic responsibility, like the civic area. You'll see that detail come out in the project, which might allay some of those concerns.
I was wondering about the possibility, or feasibility of making, like, in terms of the funding sources for Parks and Rec, it seems like a significant portion comes from regressive taxes, and I just wanted to know about the possibility that, like, sales tax and lottery are both regressive, and the possibility to switch more of the financial burden to tourism or some non-regressive.
I think some of those questions will be explored, the funding mechanisms. That is one question. So for example, one source of funding from Parks and Recreation, the Permanent Parks and Rec Fund, is property tax, which is seen as less regressive. It's currently set at a certain mill and it's restricted. It's legacy language around acquisition and development of parkland. Well, we're a built out system. We're not acquiring land. We need to take care of land. We need to operate land. So I'm making this up, but what if an outcome of this strategy was a renovation of that property tax, so it was more flexible and could be used for operations, and what if we discussed the set amount for it? So I think that is part of this conversation. It won't happen overnight. It's a long conversation and with the community, but it's on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, so we've got 3 motions on the table. We need to take each one step by step, right, Rosa?
Yes, please.
Okay, so, do we have a motion to recommend the 2025 proposed Parks and Rec Department budget of $43.9 million?
I will make the motion.
Okay, and when you make the motion.
Read it exactly.
As, yeah,
It's like Wheel of Fortune.
exactly.
I would like to make a motion to recommend the 2025 proposed Parks and Recreation Department budget of 43.9 million.
Jenny, second? Second. Okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Motion 2. Who wants to read that one? Anna, go for it.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the 2025 recommended expenditures from the Permanent Park and Recreation Fund to City Council for appropriation.
Thank you very much, Anna. Second,
Second.
thank you, Sunny. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. And then 3rd motion. Who's that?
I will move to recommend the 2025 to 2030 Parks and Recreation Department Capital Improvement Program, CIP, to Planning Board and City Council for approval and appropriation.
Second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that also passes. Okay. Anything left for that action item? Ally or Rosa?
We're good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we are moving along. Now we've got the matters for discussion information, the Wonderland Lake encroachment issue. And Regina, are you doing that?
So while she gets organized, I'll just introduce this topic. Regina Elsner is our Senior Manager for Natural Resources. We've been talking to the PRAB about this item a couple of times. It began in 2023 when we were getting complaints from neighbors about encroachments onto public land, and rather than deal with those ad hoc and in a way that could have concerns around fairness and equity, we decided to deal with it holistically. And so Regina's been leading an effort to look at this and then deal with it. And I'll just say out loud, this is one of the least fun things that we do. No one likes policing public lands in this way. People have asked us multiple times, why are you spending time on this? Go do something else. And I am so grateful for Regina's professionalism and diligence. She has met with multiple HOA groups. She has spent countless hours on the phone with neighbors. And all because that is one of our responsibilities, is to protect public lands, and you simply just can't let people have take over public lands for their own private benefit and use. And so I'm really grateful. I know this has not been a fun project, and it's really important. It's actually a national practice. It's one of the standards in our accreditation is that you have not only the legislation, but a policy for how you manage encroachments, because it is one of our responsibilities. So I just thank you, Regina, for taking this, and I will hand it to you.
Well, thank you. Good evening. Like Ali said, my name is Regina Elsner. I'm the Senior Manager for Natural Resources. And I am here this evening to talk to you about our Wonderland Lake encroachment project. I'm going to give you first a little bit of background about the project, the process that we've gone through. We'll talk about the remedy or resolution alternatives that we've identified, and then go into next steps. And just kind of a reminder, the purpose of this tonight is really to give you all the background about the project, have some opportunity to ask some questions, provide some feedback, all in preparation for August, where we will need action from the board in 2 ways. First, we will need the PRAB to provide a recommendation for the revocable license agreements. And we'll talk more about what those are and what that action will look like. And then secondly is we will also need PRAB's approval of the revocable easement agreements. And through the course of this presentation, I'll talk about what the difference is between those 2 different mechanisms. So just a quick update about the project timeline, get us where we are today. As Ali said, we started to receive a number of complaints and questions about property lines around the Wonderland Lake area and the park. And the way that this area was developed back in the 70s, there aren't a lot of fence lines. And it was just unclear where that private property, public property boundary was. And so our staff couldn't necessarily handle it because we didn't know where those boundaries were. So we hired Boulder Land Consultants in 2023. They completed a property line evaluation. We sent flyers to all of the adjacent neighbors around the park to let them know that the project was kicking off, that they would see surveyors out in the area. Through February and May of last year, we did that property line evaluation. We generated the report that this is all based off of. That report gives us an accuracy of between 4 to 6 inches, give or take, of where we feel the property boundary was. In July of 2023, we sent City Council a heads up, also giving them some awareness about the project, what we're doing, why we were doing it, as we were starting to reach out to individual property owners. I also did some initial outreach with the neighboring homeowners associations around Wonderland Lake. In September last year, we did our initial property owner outreach. We got some feedback through that process of that initial outreach, and we actually kind of went back to the drawing board a little bit to kind of continue our ongoing communication. And that's really when we developed the evaluation criteria that's listed in your project or in your packet. We did that through October and December. And really since January of this year, I've been doing a lot of outreach with individual property owners, basically January through July, essentially, talking with folks with various kinds of encroachments. And as Ali has said, we've done a lot of individual homeowner outreach, working quite closely with our neighboring HOAs. So there's been a lot of kind of back and forth time with these folks. So this map shows you the project area. All of those property boundaries outlined in red are the property boundaries that were evaluated as part of this project. There's about 10,000 linear feet of public-private property boundaries that were evaluated. We've got about in the neighborhood of 200 private property neighbors along those lines. We did identify 52 different encroachments. Those vary in size and scope, anywhere from as small as about 10 square feet to over 2,000 square feet of encroachment. So very large range of encroachments, and some of them are very temporary things like just storing some personal property on the public land to more permanent encroachments. And we'll go through kind of what that range is here today as well. So through many conversations, I've been working very closely with our city attorney's office through this entire process. We developed basically these 4 different remedy alternatives. The evaluation criteria that we developed, that sort of set of 8 questions that we walked each one of the encroachments through, helped us determine under which of these 4 alternatives, remedy alternatives, each encroachment would potentially is an appropriate remedy. So these go all the way from a simple city asserting ownership, saying that this is now ours for management, to removal, asking folks to remove that personal property or the improvements off of private or off of the public property. Then we have the revocable license agreement and then the revocable easement agreements. So for city asserting ownership, these are a couple of examples of what that would look like. Basically, some of the criteria associated where this would be the preferred remedy is where the removal would create additional disturbance to the public property that's undesirable. And the encroachment itself does not significantly impact aesthetics, does not create a significant management issue for our staff, and it's just generally a minimal area. Here you can see these landscape rocks essentially that matches the landscaping on either side of it. As well as sort of these landscape boulders that are behind the fence, which obviously were not placed by the city. They were placed at some point in time, but they don't create a huge management issue for us. Removals. Removals can vary in their size and their scope. This kind of shows you a progression of what some of these look like. The picture on the far left-hand side of the screen is one of the smaller ones where somebody has just extended a garden bed onto city property. And just to clarify, all of these encroachments are at least a foot over the public property line. We set that as a threshold. So we are, that was part of our sort of decision. We didn't want to be quabbling with folks over a matter of inches. We wanted this to be something that was of a significant, more significant area. So these are all at least a foot, if not further, onto the public property. The one in the middle, you can see well, I don't know if you can see it all the way back there. There's a fence line back there. That's the private property line behind all of these improvements. And then the third is a sort of stair bridge structure that is actually on the city property that folks are using as access into the city property from their private property. So those are all examples where we've asked for those improvements to be removed from the public property because we are not interested in maintaining more planting beds, more community gardens. So. Revocable license agreements. Revocable license agreements were really for sort of what I'm calling semi-permanent improvements. So these are improvements where there is potentially a significant burden for removal. And that was one of the key kind of criteria is that they're removing or changing that improvement is going to cost multiple thousands of dollars potentially. This includes most commonly offline property fences. So fences that were just not placed on city property. Most of these are in the neighborhood of about 5 feet off of the property line on average. There are also a few examples of patios, portions of patios or decks that are extending on to city property, as well as like this picture in the middle of a non-structural retaining wall that is there to aesthetically maintain a planting bed. So these are some of the revocable license agreements.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you said that there's a significant cost burden. Who incurs that cost?
That's a great question. I'll go over that in the next slide. So part of the revocable license agreement, you were provided in your packet a draft template or the template that we've been using for all of these revocable license agreements and negotiating these with our adjacent neighbors. Basically, the length of the agreement is until one of 3 potential end dates. The revocable license agreement gives the private property owner the right to continue to use the public property until either first they transfer ownership of the property, so they sell it, replacement of the improvement, for instance, a fence. If it's a fence and they decide it's reached the end of its useful life, we need to replace it, then we're asking them that would be replaced then back onto their property lines. Or per city charter, we can only approve those private uses for up to 20 years. So all of these revocable license agreements have an end date of 20 years. These agreements are not transferable to successors, which means that for instance, should someone enter into this agreement, sell their property and not remove the encroachment off of the public property, the city through that agreement has said that we can come in and remove that encroachment at the cost of the adjacent property owner. So all of this is at the adjacent property owner's cost. It is not a cost to be incurred by the city for removal of these encroachments. Around accountability, these agreements will be reported on that adjacent property with Boulder County. So that, again, these are things that would show up in a title search during a real estate transaction. There are insurance requirements. An important part of the revocable license agreements is that we're not transferring any property rights. So we're not actually giving the adjacent property owner any of our property rights. We are simply allowing them to use the public property. And the agreements also maintain the existing size and scope of the encroachments. Again, through the resolution, at the end of one of those 3 dates, the encroachment will be removed from city property. The public property must be restored. And then once the city accepts that both of those conditions have been met, then we will also report a release of the agreement that shows that it's been accepted. Yeah,
Is it the first date to it
yes,
take place?
yes, whichever happens of the 3. Which one happens first, those 3.
They can't just pick one.
No, no. No, so if they sell the property and it's before the 20 years, they can say, oh, we were gonna do it in 20 years. It has to be whichever is the soonest of those 3. So this slide just kind of reiterates what is PRAB's role in these revocable license agreements. Again, this is an agreement that exceeds PRAB's authority to approve because it is over 3 years. City council must approve these agreements, but we will be asking in August for PRAB to provide approval of these revocable license agreements. So as we go to city council, they are aware that PRAB is reviewed these and staff has the approval to finalize these revocable license agreements specific to these Wonderland Lake encroachments. And then the final set of encroachments are revocable easement agreements, and these are the most significant. These are permanent improvements that either most of them are structural in nature, meaning that they are tied to the structure, the actual private property, the structure on the home, or it is it has been created to address drainage, erosion issues onto this private property. And then the final one is the one in the middle is actually infrastructure that was installed around public trees. So removal of that retaining wall would actually destabilize those public trees, and we don't want to destabilize those trees. So these are all examples of the revocable revocable easement agreements. This was a pretty high bar for us to consider this because it is a disposal of public property. So these were not properties where we felt like we could ever necessarily ask for the removal of those. So,
Back of.
Yeah.
Like when you do the easement, what do they get? Just the wall itself or that whole property strip that's 20 feet long?
no, they will just get the area around the retaining wall itself and enough space around that to be able to operate and maintain it. So that is part of the terms of the agreement, is that that grantee is responsible for the maintenance of those encroachments. And so we need to give them enough space to be able to maintain it.
And then can new people just come up and make a structural change and then get this, or is it like cut off that no one
No,
else is?
so
allowed?
most of these appear to be original, the construction of the homes. Like for the example, that retaining wall on the far left, again, you can see that it appears that it's actually tied into the structure of that home, both of those homes right there. And so it was likely part of original construction.
I saw Eric just
Yeah.
raised his hand. Oh, you got it. Good.
Yeah, I see Eric.
Go for it, Eric.
Yeah, I just have a question, like why this isn't being handled by like zoning and code enforcement. You know, I have a neighbor who accidentally built his retaining wall 6 inches onto public property, and he has, you know, it's the zoning and the code people that are requiring him to remove it. And I'm not sure why that we're taking this on.
That's a great question. I think that it's part of our, I think, management obligations as the public land managers to be aware of what's happening on our property and making the, being able to treat this sort of holistically and equitably and transparently through this process. I think planning and zoning, if we were to get code enforcement involved, would have to take a much sort of harder line. And I also know that they are very strapped for capacity and being able to deal with individual issues like this. And since this has ended up being such a large project, the amount of time that would have been spent, I don't know that they would have been able to provide the same level of service and the same sort of individual attention.
Right, I agree. I mean, but it's also to be consistent across all departments, you know. If these guys in Wonderland Lake are getting a pass from Park and Rec on their encroachment, but if you live in a different part of the town and you happen to, you know, you're not going to get a pass from coding, you know, so it just, to me, it doesn't seem like it's very consistent across the city departments to be doing it this way.
Eric, I'd be happy to follow up specifically with that address. The reason Parks and Rec is handling it is because it is park land. I'm not sure where the encroachment is happening in your neighbors, if it's also public land or if it's onto other private land, but it doesn't matter. And my take on it was, if we go back to the very early days of this, we consulted heavily with code enforcement and with zoning on how they would handle it. And it's outside of their purview to handle encroachment onto park land. And so per the charter, the city charter, they don't have the purview to do it, but we have consulted with them. And I wouldn't agree with the assessment that they're getting a pass. There are only 5 instances where we are allowing a permanent easement, and it's for these very structural issues. Everywhere else, the remedy is that it has to be repaired, and we are giving some leeway. And then I also want to agree with you around consistency citywide. A next step of this is to take this approach and review it with all land managers in the city, utilities and open space, so that this policy that we develop is reviewed and implemented consistently. Right now, everything that Regina's developed around the criteria and the remedies is new, and we hope it gets applied and is consistent citywide. This has been a pilot, this small area. These types of encroachments exist all over the city, and the city has not had a documented process. The code is clear in that they're illegal, and it's not okay to encroach upon public lands, but how they're dealt with has been very subjective. This is one more way we see the pressure of land in Boulder, and that there is more attention on encroachment and need to protect public land. And so we do expect this to lead to a consistent citywide policy.
I had one more question, just in terms of how this has been received by these people you've approached.
That's a great question. As you can imagine, with 52 different neighbors, there have been about 52 different responses. Everything from, you know, there's a lot of emotions involved for some folks that have had these areas on the public property for many, many years. There have been a lot of emotions involved. There are other folks that are very, you know, I didn't know. This is how I bought the property, and are very much willing to work with the city and want to, you know, I've had folks say, this is great. You know, I'm really sorry this happens. I'm grateful that the city is willing to work with us and trying to be reasonable. So, you know, I would say that their responses have been as varied as the encroachments themselves.
Eric asked one of my questions, but just recognizing that none of us in this room were around in the 70s, like, how did this happen?
There's a lot of, you know, I think there's a lot of conjecture that could happen. One thing that I've learned and discovered through this process is looking at all of the various subdivisions that happened around Wonderland Lake. There was a lot of those were developed with very small lots and very small what are called setbacks. So setbacks that would probably never be approved in a subdivision today. Some of them in fact have 0-foot setbacks, like.
Meaning their home is on the property
Like
line.
on the property line. And then compounded with the fact that many of these properties never had fences installed, so their property boundaries were never defined by the original construction. And then 40 years of, 50 years of, just unfortunately not close monitoring, if I'm being honest.
So follow-up question. I agree with everything we're doing, just wondering though, why do we decide that now is the time to start enforcing?
That's I think it was just, there were, like Ali said, we started to get a number of questions, a number of concerns from neighbors saying, how can this be allowed? What are you doing about this? And we're like.
Why am I
what?
staring at a trampoline in the open space that is
Right.
next to my home? Like that is public land and it's not, so there were multiple complaints and we didn't.
Yeah. So there were multiple complaints, and again, wanting to be as equitable and as holistic and identify and not having the potential that we are treating one person differently than their neighbor 5 houses down. So that we could do this sort of transparently across the board. We decided to dedicate the resources and the capacity to address this in a way that was transparent, equitable, holistic, all of those things. So it was
Making
any
any
choice.
Making any kind of maintenance or management decisions based upon complaints can have real racial impacts. Lots of impacts when it's just done on a complaint base, and we chose not to do that.
I think that in general, this is a reasonable approach. It just seems like from an equity perspective, like this incentivizes people who may have an extra $1 million to throw around to just build a new deck on the public land and then say like, it's gonna cost me a lot of money to.
So
Like, how does that not, like, when you say this is gonna be our policy now going forward? Is it something that it has to have not, it had to existed since the 70s, or like, what's the cutoff that? that's gonna
So
be?
I think what this does is part of the encroachment policy is this was, yes, an effort to identify potentially very long-standing encroachments. What it also allows us to do is establish what does the policy and the procedure look like if we were to identify a single one-off situation where like, okay, we know where this property boundary is now because we've done a property line evaluation. We feel confident we know where it is, and you are now building on our property. That is unacceptable, that we can be more proactive in that management and approaching. And then honestly, with the rangers being able to enforce some of those, whether it's trespass, damage to public property, other pieces of our Boulder Revised Code that we can utilize in the moment when things are happening. But because this was so long-standing, that would be the other goal of the encroachment policy is what do we have to do when we, as staff, sees it happening in the moment.
So I just wanted to say it really clearly. This does not apply if we walk out tomorrow and someone is building a deck on public lands. This does not apply. This is for the retroactive remediation of existing encroachments.
I have lots of questions, but are you finished and ready for questions?
I have a few more slides,
Okay, I'll let you.
so I do have a few more slides that we can get through, and I do know we have, I'd love to answer more questions, but if you don't mind, let's finish the slides and then we'll answer more questions. So back to the revocable easement agreements, there are 5 specific encroachments that we are proposing to engage with these revocable easement agreements. You can see what they all entail. They're all retaining walls in some manner or fashion. And then there is also one for roof drainage. Again, this is just simply, they have less than 5 feet off of their property and cannot appropriately manage the roof drainage, and it spills onto park property. So it's basically a drainage easement. So while we have 5 specific encroachments, we're actually looking at negotiating 7 different easement agreements with each individual adjacent property owner. Just kind of going back quickly through the agreement terms, the length, generally, this is into perpetuity. Unless one of three things happens, this is why it's called a revocable easement. If there is a public process through city council, through the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, that there's a change in the use of the public park property that makes that encroachment no longer feasible. But again, that would be part of a very public process with lots of engagement. Most of these easements exist in areas where there's also a utility agreement or a utility easement. We can't control if the utility needs to get in there and change their infrastructure. We don't control the utilities. And then the third is if there is something that happens and the grantee engages in some sort of a substantial reconstruction. So one person that I was speaking with, I was like, say in 75 years, the owner of this property decides they want to scrape the property and rebuild a new home on this property. At that point in time, that's when we would look to remove that easement so that that property is being rebuilt and it needs to be handled all within the private property boundaries. So that's generally the terms of the revocable easement agreement. Again, recorded with Boulder County. All of the easement agreements maintain the existing size and scope of the encroachment. They can't get larger. And as I mentioned before, it clarifies responsibility for who's maintaining that encroachment. Many of these are not for the benefit of the public property. They are for the benefit of the private property. So the private property owner needs to bear the maintenance of those improvements. I think I mentioned this, the revocable easement agreement is considered a disposal of public property rights. So this does have to follow our disposal of parkland process, which requires an approval from the PRAB of at least 4 members. We do need a planning board action. Doesn't necessarily require planning board approval or recommendation, but they do have to take action on it. And then city council has the final approval because it is a property right that we're looking to dispose of. Quickly, sort of next steps. Obviously, we're here today to talk about it, answer questions, get some feedback from the crowd. In August, we are looking for a PRAB action item with those 2 different recommendations. In September, we are looking for planning board consideration and city council action. And then as Ali had mentioned, August sort of through October, my intention is to pull all of the learnings from this process together, working with some of our other land management departments, open space, utilities, greenways, others, to make sure that we have sort of a citywide comprehensive approach and operating procedure for how we deal with encroachments. So at this point, we're here. I'm finished up to the questions for the PRAB specifically here, and then I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Yeah, I have a question about, especially the easements. It sounds like Parks and Rec does not want to be responsible for structural or drainage issues that come from private property. So if I understand right, we're just saying, okay, you can keep it there, but we still own it. Has there been any discussion about just saying, you know what, things have changed since the 70s. We don't want to be liable or responsible. Why don't we sell 2 feet of land or 5 feet of land that I just can't imagine public use actually coming into play. Like if I was in a big open park, I wouldn't go sit 2 feet away from someone's house, especially if there's drainage issues or a retaining wall. Like it feels like there's a stream of income that we're not tapping into that would also save us a lot of headaches in the future as ground moves. I'm a geologist by training. Like I know with all the crazy weather, like it would maybe do us a big service to say, we'll actually give you 10 feet because we don't want to deal with what could potentially happen in certain circumstances that just the geography dictates that this isn't a place for us for public use anyway at this point.
I would say, I don't think that selling the public property is necessarily going to create an additional benefit to the public land. I would say that in the case of a lot of these easements, that if there were a chance for them to be rebuilt, being able to have it be a revocable easement, it creates contiguity of our public land and doesn't create these little spikes out that then we have to continue to mow around or manage around. It allows us to continue to manage right up to those encroachments themselves. So for one of the encroachments you saw, it was a retaining wall. We do mow in that area, so it allows us to continue to mow and create consistent management across that land. It's just the retaining wall itself is not an improvement that we would want to be responsible.
But if
and
it
maintain.
fails, don't we have to fix it? If it's on public land?
If that is part of the reason for the easement agreements, is because public land is not the one benefiting from the existence of that retaining wall. And so the city doesn't feel that the public should be responsible for maintaining that. And so if it fails, it needs to be the responsibility of the property owner who's benefiting from the existence of that encroachment, which are those adjacent property owners. As far as sort of that liability piece goes, Allie, you may have to correct me.
I think there's a brief, I hear where you're going, and I think the
Yeah.
brief way to say is that this agreement accomplishes both things. It protects public land, transfers the responsibility and liability to the property owner who is benefiting. And so that's the intense attorney review is what this does. And I mean, I could go into all the reasons why I don't think opening the door for sale of public lands is the right answer because of one, well, there's a lot of reasons. But in these, I just want to remind you that of all of the land that was surveyed, there are 5 permanent easements that we're looking at. And it's just the way these homes were built in 1970. It's not any malice or harm. And, there is continuity of management across the parkland. We don't want to divide it up. We just want to transfer the liability to these homeowners and make it clear that this is public property and always will be.
But, so we're going right up against people's homes and mowing their lawns and
No, that we're mowing park.
mowing parkland.
Most of these areas are natural areas that actually get a rough cut just twice a year. That's the other reason for the management is that this is natural habitat and trying to protect those. There are nesting birds, there are pollinators, there are rodents, there's lots of habitat in this area that is being impacted.
The license still transfers liability to the owner as well, though, correct?
Correct.
So just reading through all this simple question, when you in the very beginning said assert ownership or so like the rocks that were against the fence, are they just, you're just taking them?
We're basically what we're saying is we're asking the adjacent property owner, we're saying, okay, these rocks are going to continue to exist here. The city is asserting ownership over these. And if at any certain point in the future, we decide we want to remove those rocks, we're going to do so.
Okay.
And you're going to be okay with it because it's on city property and it's now ours. It's basically giving us the ability to, if in the future, like I said, we need to remove those rocks or we want to change that planting or whatever it happens to be, that we will do that because it is city property. And just making sure that those adjacent property owners are aware of that. Because a lot of these folks, some of them are like, but that's not what I was told when I bought this property. And so it's just being able to have out loud, have that documentation of like, there's the property line, this is the city's.
So, okay. In general, I think this is a great creative solution for a big problem that impacts lots of people. Even though it's 5 easements, there's still 200 homes that are around there in some fashion that are affected by whatever decisions are made through this process. I do think there needs to be a process in place, but I personally I'm not okay with the easement portion. I would say I would be okay with the license and lending the land, but I would not vote to dispose of any city property. So I think it's a really creative solution. But there's a way to fix it. When you buy a house, it's easy to find a plat of survey and figure out where your lot lines are. Your inspector should come in and tell you these things as well. So this is the way I bought the house. To me, is not a reasonable
Excuse.
excuse for problems on your property. I've owned lots of houses in different places and had to go through many things like this. I'm on my HOA board right now. We deal with this stuff all the time. So I really appreciate all the effort that you made, and I do think that this is the beginning of a great policy that needs to be put into place citywide. But I don't think that the disposal of any public parks is a solution. So I would be fine with licensing all of it, but not, I'm personally, I have some issues. Unless they're utility. So if we're transferring ownership of, if we're transferring liability in the license, I would want to do the same thing with any things that maybe roof drainage, again, there's ways to drain things in a different direction. So there's got to be a solution for retaining walls and who's, if I was the one with the garden beds in the back and you said, well, I don't like this, but this guy over here has trees that might be affected and they have a retaining wall, but that one gets a license, but the garden beds don't. I mean, how do you make that decision? So what's an easement? What's a license? So in my eyes, you either follow it, or if it's something that really would be detrimental to the park or the property, it would have to be a license. It'd be one of those two. But the easement for me goes a little.
I'm wondering, I think when we bring this back to you, we can clarify with our attorneys. I think we're just, it's considered a disposal because we're disposing some rights to the property. It's not a disposal of land. We still own the land. Is that, was that part clear? Like, we're not giving anyone public land. They're getting a permanent right to that improvement.
But it's
so
a
that,
perpetual easement.
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So the license, eventually that problem has to be fixed.
Got it.
The easement doesn't. So that problem just stays a problem
Well,
forever.
so let's go back to the pictures of those. And I just want to make sure I understand. So for example, the homes that have the retaining wall was a part of the home's construction. You're saying we should be seeking a remedy for that?
Yes, exactly. Well, not we should be seeking,
Sure.
they should be seeking.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the one in the middle, that's a tough one, right? Because it's got the retaining wall around trees that are public property. I don't know, I'm not sure. There has to be a solution. I mean, I know we don't want to lose tree canopy in any fashion, but
I can speak to some of the specific terms to that one in the middle, is that that one has an additional term in it that when the city at our sole discretion removes those trees, because they are one of the 4 Ds that our forestry team uses to remove public trees that are diseased, dying, defective, or dead. And they are one of those 4 things, and those 2 public trees are removed, that retaining wall will then, that easement is that they're revoked at that point in time for that one in particular. But the others are all such that I don't know that there is a remedy necessarily.
so why wouldn't the middle one just be a license?
Because those trees can go on, could live for many decades still. That would exceed that 20-year term that we cannot permit
Longer
per
than
city
the
charter.
Yeah.
Per city charter. Also, the license agreements cannot be transferred to successors.
Mhm.
So if they sell the property, it can't be transferred to a future property owner.
Mhm.
The easement is the only one that's transferable to a future property owner. And I did consult with our foresters on this particular one, in that if those trees have grown and matured with that retaining wall in place, if that were to be removed, those trees could very potentially die
Sure.
and no longer be stable.
Right, yeah.
So,
You can't just take the retaining wall, like that it's on your property, it's yours now, it's part of the tree.
he's saying the public, we couldn't, I don't think, we wouldn't necessarily want that retaining wall. It's not a retaining wall that, without those trees, the retaining wall does us no benefit. Does not benefit the city property.
So you're saying then when the trees die, then we're stuck with the retaining wall and nothing?
Well, no, when the trees die.
Oh, because if it's the easement, right, then it goes-
Revocable.
right.
Once the trees die, then that
Oh,
easement.
no, I'm saying if we were to,
Oh, just assert the management.
yes, correct.
Or ownership, yeah,
Yeah.
then we'd have a retaining wall that
We don't want.
we don't want.
And if you were to remove that retaining wall and a year later, there's structural damage to the house, which is right next to it, who's gonna take care of that?
Like the
For which
trees
one?
fall on the
Any of
house.
them,
I
or-
just feel like, and I'm not there, I wish we could go there and see these spaces, but
Mhm.
what I'm imagining is there are swaths of land that nobody is actually gonna use publicly, that are too close to private homes, that are maybe like, because of the geology or the topography of the land, have evolved in a way that people have built and supported and protected in the most logical, cost-efficient way. And it makes more sense to sell and give up the little swaths that aren't really of value to the general public and wash our hands of it.
How do you know what's the value? Like, how far in do you go before it doesn't become a value? I mean, it's all public record and it's a survey and it is what it is, you know?
But why
But
not
who's to-
sell something, use that money and get something for something we're not using? Like, so I wouldn't go sit next to someone's fence or.
Yeah, but how far would it have to be out until you sat against it? So how much land are you gonna give them until it's good for public use?
Well, I think in these 5 situations, again, I'm not there, but it looks pretty obvious where the border is. And anything beyond those little borders don't seem like useful space to the public. Whereas these people might be very invested in it and want to sell it, and then we don't have to maintain it or think in the future of how that's gonna work. Like, I haven't seen the boundaries, but I can imagine it would be cost effective and not make a real significant shift in the environmental value of it to make to give a birth to these homes. Like, I don't think we want the land.
I'm gonna give just some really specific information on the disposal of parkland. It's an incredibly rigorous process that has significant community engagement and goes all the way to city council. And again, I think we're getting, well, when I say disposal, I mean actually selling it to the community as you're proposing. I think it is dangerous. And would not be fulfilling our mission and our roles as outlined in the Boulder Revised Charter to consider selling land that had been given or sold to the city for the purposes of parkland. I think it opens an incredibly slippery slope. There are homes adjacent to parkland all over the community. And if you start where Jenny is going, I hear 100% what you're saying, that you think that this is an issue. We've had attorneys review this. They reviewed the liability and this is their best solution. I will let you know that the way the city attorney's office is structured is there's a city attorney, there's deputy city attorneys, and then there's attorneys. And our attorney, the city attorney, is closely evaluating this right now because this is a whole lot of administrative rigmarole to go to the board and then to planning board and to city council to see, is there a simpler solution? Because this is a whole heck of a lot of time. And we haven't even gone to planning board and city council yet. Is there a different, simpler solution? And what I'm hearing from the PRAB is that you want to both protect public land interest. You're looking for something that's easier. I wish we had an attorney here to talk about the liability concerns you're sharing. We don't share them. Our attorneys don't share them. They think they're covered in these agreements that we have created. And so I'd be leery of developing a response to those concerns that aren't shared by our attorneys.
Looks like Eric has a question.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I think it's good to have this policy moving forward, but I have a little more sympathy for the landowners. I think a lot of it was probably inadvertent. And I mean, some are more egregious than others, but have you guys ever just looked at sort of saying, grandfathering some of these in and, these 70s sort of things and then everything moving forward, take this approach with, but it does seem like a lot of bureaucratic headache. And I'm not sure what really comes out of it that much, other than setting this precedent. But I mean, it's gonna, and I don't see it as that egregious of, stuff.
You draw that line, that's the question. So like the policies are in place, surveys, the plats of surveys are written, the parkland is what the parkland is, and everybody in the city has to, 100,000 people have to abide by those rules. If you start just saying, well, this one's grandfathered and that one's grandfathered and we're gonna sell this, but we don't wanna sell that. I
But
think
we
that
haven't
just,
enforced it for 50 years. I mean, I think that there's some, there is some sort of law around that, basically sort of like, if you don't enforce something for 50 years, it sort of becomes part of their property, like, so it's not, if you're, I just think it's we're spending a lot of time and effort on something that's, dubious and what benefit the environment and Park and Rec is getting out of this.
In general, I agree with the whole process. I just think that it should be either a cert ownership.
I want to make sure that we're keeping moving along, but I did just have one question about what is is it a legal requirement that we cannot have a license that runs with the land, you know, past one owner? Is it like you cannot license something that is attached to that property? Or are we making to do that?
I think part of it is we're making a choice to do that within at least those license agreements, because A, they can't extend beyond 20 years. But B, with the goal to have the encroachments eventually be removed from the property, that those are clear. Transfer of ownership is a clear date and time in which there is a mechanism by which for us to check and see if that has been removed. Because the goal at the end of the day is to have the vast majority of these encroachments removed from the public property.
And so when there's a sale, do we then, we're prompted by that, by the fact that there's a sale, we then go to the new owner and say, hey, let's revisit this. We'd like you to get rid of this.
So the actual terms of the agreement are that the existing property owner prior to that sale and that transfer has to have the release of that, the release of the agreement signed. So that the city they've done the work, the city has approved the work, we're releasing that. So I could imagine it being a sort of a term of the similar to like the inspection, like I want a radon system, the new property owner, I want a new radon system installed, and okay, well, then we're gonna negotiate what that looks like. Well, we need to move this fence line to remove this, you know, it's essentially a color on title. This agreement shows as a color on title and that.
But a buyer could say, I'm okay with this thing. So do we then proactively approach the new owner if they opt to keep it?
If they opt to keep it, then it's in violation of that agreement and they are no longer part of that, for lack of a better word, grandfathering in of the encroachment. And we as the city, through the terms of that agreement, have said, we can now go in, we will remove the encroachment and place a lien on the property.
Is that the same? Let's say someone has a trampoline in Parkland and they say, I like my trampoline, I'm gonna leave it there. We then place a lien on the property until they remove their trampoline.
So what we have done in cases so the trampoline is actually very specific that could create a liability for the city if we allow that to continue on the public property. Because that's, you know, not something that we insure, it's not something that we maintain, it could create a liability. So we give them a certain amount of time to remove that from the city property. And if they don't, we have started to actually issue violations and summons for that it must be removed off of the city property. And if it continues, we will write a citation and a summons.
What if it was something that didn't create liability? Someone's storing lumber.
Storing lumber.
There's always liability.
What?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we always liability.
Yeah.
But it's a similar process.
Yeah, it would be a similar process. Basically, with the removals we've given them and
Update that you'll consider things for the more temporary.
I think that would be a property by property conversation. I don't think it would be necessarily it's as of January 1st, 2024, anything prior to that, we'd look at, it would have to be specific to each property.
Just in my opinion, that's the thing.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Well, I have a million more questions, but in the interest of time, thank you for that presentation. Really appreciate it.
And I'm happy to follow up offline with any of those as well.
Great, thank you.
So the next steps is next month you'll ask for a vote.
Correct.
Yeah, and I would just ask that the materials provided next month, try to incorporate some responses to the issues that were raised here, because if we're gonna take a vote on this, I think there are some outlying questions. And so with that way, we can actually talk with staff like more meaningfully before we actually vote on it.
Yep, and I want to just check, so I'm hearing one on just clarifying the disposal on the 5, and because I hear your interest in not ceding any parkland and just getting the attorney's input on that. The question on liability and clarifying that this isn't assuming any liability and we don't have an interest in getting rid of this property for that. If there are other questions, let's say email them to us by end of the week would be ideal, but no later than Monday. I'm certain we'll need to consult with the attorneys or others, but we would love to be responsive to those in the materials. And, oh, we have more time because this isn't coming. Oh, it is coming to you in August.
Mhm.
We could push it to September. I
Yeah,
can't remember.
September 23rd is when it's currently on Bryce's agenda, which we could push
Yeah.
if we needed to.
If you can send us questions, we'll try and keep everything as scheduled.
Yeah.
By end of the week would be great.
Yeah, and I would just say, I would like to understand more fully how you guys are drawing the line between doing an easement versus a license.
Yep. Oh, and I want to capture a third question. I hear Anna's on what we want to apply this citywide. I mean, my take would be, we are clarifying that it is not okay to privatize public lands. And this is how we'll be enforcing it citywide. And to Regina's point, like, I think it's as of the effective date of the policy, you build anything on city property, it's going to be removed. And we don't care how much you spent because it is our policy to enforce what is the law.
If they built it last year, or 2 years ago, or
Right.
2 years ago, it's.
Right.
You should have
But
a-
the other thing, I thought of this earlier and I let it go. Part of what this conversation has elevated is the importance with planning and development services to review lot lines for deck and fence permits. That is part of the process, right? So people shouldn't be just willy-nilly building a deck or a fence onto public property. If they do, they did so without a permit and the city will be enforcing it. And so I hear the concern that we'd be allowing things that are 1 year old or 2 years old, but I do think development review has gotten so much better in the recent decades that if someone is building a fence or a deck, it's not going to be onto city property because the development review doesn't allow for that the way it might have in the day when the paper review allowed for a lot more error, or it was more permissive to build things without a permit. So that is another protection that I meant to just share out loud, that in development review, they do review.
Is there a way to tell us how many houses sit on park property, like are adjacent to park property?
All of our parks are individual.
All of them, like what would the total number of houses that would be affected? I mean, that's a.
Probably not something you can do on a lot.
I'm just curious.
That's, I mean,
It's.
I think it's hours of GIS.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Hours and hours and hours of,
I would just be curious, really, at the end of the day, how many houses we're talking about.
yeah. It's a lot. I mean, parks are centered in neighborhoods or greenways. So, a lot of our open space is adjacent to.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I want to say that when there were discussions around some of the wildfire mowing and things like that, open space that they have, I think 250 miles of property boundaries with private property. So,
Wow.
I mean, if we were to
That's a lot.
extrapolate that from parks to citywide, like we have.
So this is a very important conversation.
Great, that was awesome. Thanks so much for the discussion. Okay, let's move on to matters from the department and Ally, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I am so excited to just introduce this first item. This is the final draft of the tennis and pickleball court system plan. I see smiles in the back. You all have seen the same emails I have, where folks have said, listen, tennis is growing, pickleball is growing. We're fighting for courts. There are less courts in the community. Please, please help us. We heard that in 2022 when we developed the park, the 2022 park plan. And what we heard was we needed a better plan to address this really. I mean, double-digit growth sport that is really serving all ages. It is important. We value pickleball, we value tennis. What I find incredible is that we were prepared. As you can see, we thought maybe we would have, we might have a lot of folks here tonight. I just want to introduce our partner in the back. Gonzo Garcia has been, 20 years ago, he was a coordinator who worked for the City of Boulder Sports Department. When we made a decision that is in line with current direction today, when something requires expert skill, let's outsource it and let an expert run it. And Gonzo has competed for and successfully won the partnership of the city multiple times. He's been our tennis partner for, I think it's 15 years now, maybe a few more, 2006?
17.
When did it start? Not 17, 17 years. Okay. Yeah, so 2007, Gonzo Garcia has been our partner teaching kids and adults tennis. But the fact that this room isn't full speaks to the incredible work of Tina Briggs and Charlotte O'Donnell and the planning team to bring folks along in this plan. You have been hearing about it multiple times. You've heard about the community engagement, the regular relationship building with Boco Pickleball, with the Boulder Tennis Association. Bernie has contributed time as a liaison on this project. And for folks who, well, I'm gonna just flip it and say this plan is really momentous for us because we're gonna do a better job serving this portion of our community, and we're really excited about it. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Charlotte to do the presentation.
Thanks for that introduction. As Ali mentioned, my name is Charlotte O'Donnell, and I'm a city planner here with the Boulder Parks and Recreation Department. Here to talk about the tennis and pickleball court system plan, hopefully for the last time with you all. Pretty brief agenda tonight, as we've been here quite a number of times in the past year, but we'll go over a brief background and purpose, timeline, and then we'll dive into the key recommendations of the plan. So those kind of high level pieces that are included in the executive summary and the conclusion, but happy to answer questions at the end with more specifics, as the whole plan you saw was attached to your packet. So to start with the context, our current system is 20 dedicated outdoor tennis courts and 8 multi-use courts. The standard on those multi-use courts is 2 pickleball court lines have been drawn over 1 tennis line, so they can be used for both sports. Also the growing demand that Ali spoke to, so I won't talk any more on that. We know that's very real. And there's also changing private supply in our community that we may have seen emails or heard throughout the process. While it's outside of BPR's control, we realize that we have a significant role to play in the community, and we're evaluating what that role is as part of this project, and acknowledging that's part of the landscape. So to address that context, the 3 primary outcomes of the tennis and pickleball court system plan are recommended short-term actions about how the department manages and invests in BPR's current courts, suggested long-range investment opportunities in BPR's court system, and recommended next steps to evaluate if and how BPR may play a role in potential indoor and outdoor facility. And if those sound familiar, again, it may be because we've been to Crab quite a number of times. That's the blue portion of this timeline graphic on the bottom where we've come to speak with you. And as Ali mentioned, Bernie has attended quite a few more meetings, and thank you so much for all your efforts. As we move into the pink, and we met with our stakeholders regularly, monthly throughout this process. Bernie was there alongside us and really appreciate that. In addition to our stakeholders, we had quite a few people in the room at the beginning. In October 2023, we had about 200 people at a public meeting and over 1,000 comments submitted on the online portion of that engagement. And then in March, we had almost 100 people and several hundred comments on that online portion of the engagement. So we heard a lot from the community throughout this process. And that rolls up into the green, which I know it's a little bit hard to read here with that tiny font, but the different parts of the plan that wrap up into the whole document, all those different chapters that come together. But as we dive into the key recommendations of the plan, the first one, it lays the foundation. So it's all plans for court should follow the City of Boulder's Community Sustainability, Equity, and Resilience Framework, and the Parks and Recreation Department plan best serve the community. So an example of what this means is in that department plan, also known as the 2022 Master Plan, one of the key themes of that plan was taking care of what we have. And in this case, in terms of courts, what that leads to is our second recommendation, which is BPR should continue the asset management approach by investing $400,000 per year over the next 6 years to improve playability of existing courts and reduce long-term maintenance costs. So this indeed is following that guidance to take care of what we have. And the two pictures here are of Arapahoe Ridge and Columbine, which are the two properties that are being addressed this year through this asset management approach, and they're both getting upgraded concrete that's now reinforced or called post-tension concrete. That'll expand that lifespan and it reduce the need for crack filling and resurfacing. So it's a win for our maintenance team and our maintenance costs, as well as the community itself who gets to now enjoy those courts for a longer time. But moving on, beyond our current supply, this plan also really looked at what level of service we should be providing our community. So as our court supply has remained somewhat stagnant, we know that these have been growing sports. And so this speaks to that recommended level of service in our community, that goal, which is BPR should develop additional outdoor courts as funding and capacity allow. The recommended additions are 22 dedicated outdoor tennis courts and 22 dedicated outdoor pickleball courts. So some of you may remember the presentation we made specifically about this back in January, where we looked at how much the sports are growing, what the ratio of tennis courts to pickleball courts may look like in the future in the community, and just how much the population of Boulder is projected to grow throughout the years. And so this graphic may also look familiar from that presentation, which the green circles are current court locations. The yellow circles are 3 priority properties that we looked at as part of this plan, where potentially in the next 6 years, there could be development of additional courts. And then the blue circles are 2 additional properties where if we're not able to meet that goal of 44 additional courts at the 3 yellow properties, there are additional sites where courts could be located. And then moving to indoor. So that's outdoor dedicated courts, but thinking about indoor opportunities as well that we know are important to our community and changing with the private supply. This one speaks to that by saying BPR should explore potential partnerships to better understand indoor facility opportunities. For example, BPR will continue to determine feasibility of a temporary indoor facility with construction at East Boulder Community Park in 2025 and long-term opportunities as part of the Future of Recreation Centers project. This picture you heard a lot more about last month. This one is an example indoor facility from Parker, Colorado. And you'll hear a lot more about the Future of Rec Centers project coming next month. And then finally, there's lots of other, this is kind of a catch-all recommendation, but BPR should pursue programming, reservation, and maintenance improvements. One of those improvements speaks to the budget conversation we had earlier, looking at how our rental and reservation fees now align with this new fee policy that we've created. So that would be one example. But this chapter obviously had a lot more specifics on those day-to-day operations as well. So with that, we're, collecting final feedback from you all, final questions tonight. This plan based on charter, does not require formal approval, but of course, we've come to you so many times because we value your voices and your thoughts. Once we collect your feedback tonight and make any final changes, like adding T's to very important names in the document, for instance, that we may have typoed, we will publish this plan online and share it. So although it's technical and it's intended to support staff throughout the next couple of years, we want to keep this process transparent for our community and bring them along as we have throughout this process. So that's the brief for tonight. So thank you all for coming through this project with us. What questions are deep?
I was just curious about the 2022 outdoor court utilization analysis. It just seems really low. And so I was wondering how that was I think
In terms of number of hours.
used, yeah. So I mean, it appears that only the courts that we have were only used 20% of the hours they're available.
Yeah, I realize I'm sharing my screen. I should have brought my printed copy so I could flip to that.
I wonder if
I can go there. You won't miss certain page, Jenny?
Yeah.
It's page 107 of the packet. And
Yeah, thank you. I like have it up in another window,
Yeah.
but that doesn't help me right now.
No. Oh, and then I just clicked off.
This is
Yeah.
only hours that it was reserved in ActiveNet.
right, so I was
Yes.
wondering if that was like, is there drop-ins that are happening kind of a thing?
Yeah.
And are the reservations happening through like a Gonzo is part of the reservation hours? That's internal BPR, I think.
Correct, yeah.
And then anything else would be from like a tennis club or?
Or it could be an individual person doing a reservation online as well, right? Yeah,
So although the hours that are officially reserved are 20%, the drop-in rate would make it.
correct. Exactly, yeah. And also like maintenance, for instance. It's a small percentage, but that's not included as well.
Okay. And do you think like, for example, you showed Columbine as an example of something that needs to have some upkeep done? That is showing a total number of reserved hours only at 5%. Do you think that's because the courts are damaged in some manner or need upkeep?
That definitely could be part of it. That's what we're hearing anecdotally from the community for sure.
And then I just wanted to ask about the new courts that you're talking about building at East Boulder Rec. And you're talking about putting up some sort of potential indoor structure. That's kind of like the bubble that we talked about last time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can support, because I know a lot of the courts we have won't support a current bubble.
Right, so that would be part of the conversation is as we create new courts, can we build them to support a bubble? The courts that are existing at East Boulder will not.
And are the bubbles temporary in nature or can they be permanent?
We have a shorter life cycle.
Okay,
So, and the idea is, in our case, we're trying to provide a more permanent indoor facility as part of the plan, sort of recommendation to look into that with partners. So the bubble is a way to provide some indoor use, but again, we don't currently have funding for that. Ali's been trying to work with partners to figure out how we can build a partnership to make that happen. Sort of more to come on that.
right, and that's just part of the East Boulder Rec.
Correct. The other thing I'll just note is not all bubbles are year round. Some are operated just seasonally. For example, the current one in town at RMTC was only in place seasonally and the rest of the time the courts were open. And that could be a more cost-effective way to do it. You're not running any, HVAC or electricity for the months when we have our 300 days of sunshine and really mild climate. So all of those are things that when we say there's a lot more work to happen to flesh this out, it's details like that.
And this is talk about detail. This is an incredibly detailed. Thank you for putting it all.
Yeah, I was just amazed by the amount of feedback you were able to get from community users and putting that all together in a very readable format. I thought that was really helpful. My one question is just related to funding. So like what of the 22 new courts we think we're gonna build, what % are like funded versus unfunded or not funded?
Yeah. Yeah, no, East Boulder Community Park is the Division Project Manager, Tina Briggs, Senior Landscape Architect, will lead that effort. And that's where we're initially trying to put in the idea of converting courts to provide 16 pickleball courts and up to 8 dedicated tennis courts. So that's really our first effort to really invest and provide new facilities. As we get into later years in the CIP, that's when we'll be bringing more of that detail back to you. And the plan points out Tom Watson, North Hotels as the potential places to do.
But what about like, of those things at the courts at East Boulder, are we budgeted? I forget, are we budgeted for those?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then the later stuff like building at Belmont and Watson and other places, that's not currently in the budget.
It's not, it's basically as we come back to a late out years in the CIP and we'll start to balance the competing needs, that's when we'll get into more detailed discussion on those. We just identified the place where it can occur,
Yeah.
which is the critical piece.
But we're not saying to the public, like, we can currently with money we have, build these things.
Yeah, I want to be really direct. There is no funding in the CIP to build at Tom Watson or Belmont.
Right.
I think that's what you're
the public
asking.
is-
Like, we'll revisit it each year, but
Right.
here's what I want to add, because in September, Angie Jeffords, the executive director of our philanthropic nonprofit partner, is going to come talk to you. You all have had a lot of questions about fundraising. She's going to talk about the work of play. She's going to unveil their 3 capital campaigns that are part of their MOU, that they run major capital campaigns to help us with fundraising. You all have had a lot of questions about that. I believe that we have some very exciting seed money that will have formal documentation of, that will be the start of a courts campaign. We have heard from the community that they want to contribute, that if money is the limiting factor, they want to try and make it happen. So we're happy to capitalize on that interest. We know that there are partners that are interested in building tennis courts. And so if we're relying on city money, there is none. What we're hoping to do with the court system plan is to position yourself to ask for money.
Yep. Yeah, the only reason I raised that question is because I want to make sure that the public understands that just because we've created a plan
Right.
and an aspiration to do these things, that doesn't necessarily mean we are going to do that because we have the funds to do it, or if we hope to do it, but I just want to make sure the public is clear about that.
And there is like that, it's great to state that, as well as the pragmatic aspect of the plan is saying, we're actually going to invest in the existing codes and get those to a really good standard, to get better use. And we've got money to begin in reducing the new codes. So the plan isn't just going to sit on the shelf. So we can take care of that, but also identify the reality of where we can't fund it.
Yeah.
So that, I like that about this plan, is it covers both aspects. Sometimes plans just sit on the shelf and you can't implement them for years. So there is a balancing act there.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Mm.
And then Eric's got a question.
Oh,
Yeah, just had a question about a couple of questions. First of all, where did the 400K estimate come, for annual maintenance? Was that just, was there a need study, or there was a cost estimate of that, or?
Yeah, so that's based off of the estimate to redo 2 pairs of courts for 4 tennis courts every year, and how that would then trickle down throughout the system. So it is based off cost estimate for redoing that post-tension concrete.
and
And then secondly,
Say those specific numbers if you want.
when do you think we could get these East Boulder courts in the ground? I mean, like, it sounds like we're starting this whole East Boulder process this fall, but I mean, when can the public see those East Boulder? It sounds like the funding's there, right? I mean, can we do these? Can we
our dream
expedite
would
that?
be our dream would be to have ribbon cutting last July, but we do have to go through a few steps, and Tina's going to lead the project. We really are, like, frankly, looking to move it forward, so we hopefully can move forward in construction in 25, probably late 25. There is always unknowns like permitting and aspects of design that you have to consider, but we're doing our best to put it on a fast track to get it done.
And
And
is
we'll
there
keep you
any
updated.
options? Is that where we're looking for an indoor facility or indoor outdoor facility possibly at those ones that are already sort of budgeted for?
Correct. It's with that project that we're exploring the feasibility of a seasonal indoor option.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Any other questions from the PRAB before we move on?
I just mentioned one thing. This was Ali gave some credit to the staff, and obviously Ali great leadership in the project, but this was Charlotte's first project as project manager. So I think she set a pretty high bar.
No wonder it was so
But just credit Charlotte for that work like that.
And I was just gonna add that I've said it in this room before, but I'll say it again, like, I really respect the work that Charlotte and Tina did on this project. There's a lot of engagement with the public, and I know that was tireless work, so well done to you both.
And I just want to say, adding on to the compliment sandwich here, my kids have been doing Gonzo tennis for years, and it's awesome. It's still here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so great. Okay. Oh, Eric, did you still have a question, or did you mean to?
Yeah, I
take your
just
hand down?
have one other question. I know that in some of the email conversations that I've had with people that were involved with the stakeholder groups, they kind of want to continue having sort of a work group and be involved going forward. Is there a formal process to do that, to have a check-in once a year about how we're implementing this plan. I think that would be, I think there's people that would be interested in that. I think it's good to keep the momentum on this. You know, and is that something that we would consider? Do you guys have work groups? Is that, how would that play out?
Yeah, that's something we've talked about with our current stakeholders, and I don't know, Tina, if you want to add anything, but are definitely exploring for the East Boulder, like specific.
Yeah, so as we start up the project for East Boulder Community Park, we certainly are going to tap into those same stakeholders. So at the appropriate parts of engagement, as we set out that engagement plan, we'll look at the best places where they can provide the feedback to us and it'll be most useful. So whether that's a monthly, bi-monthly, or quarterly, we'll define that as the project gets a little bit more time, but they'll absolutely still be involved.
I want to add to that with just our aquatic stakeholders have a similar interest. There are so many groups for whom the city is not the provider of the program, but we're the facilitator because they happen in public facilities or on parkland. And so working not just in a rentor, rentee, whatever, I'm missing up the words, but in a very transactional relationship, how do we actually work in partnership with all these providers who provide so many services to our youth? So Scott and Megan are doing this with the aquatics group. In 2025, we have a work plan item to just develop better partnership models in general. I'm very interested in this with youth sports. Boulder Parks and Recreation is very different from most municipal agencies in how little youth sports we provide, but we facilitate almost all of it through our facilities. And we're really interested in how we can help shape that to address some of the critical issues facing youth sports. So this is a great model, the way that we built a relationship with BTA, BOCO, pickleball, the way Megan and Scott are doing it with the aquatics groups. We should do the same thing with all of our user groups. So Eric, I really appreciate you just elevating that issue because I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we put a lot of effort into this plan. I would just like to keep the momentum and like, you know, have an annual check-in as PRAB and say, how are we doing on this 5-year plan to implement these 22 courts, you know, and so that we keep thinking about this and kind of like, I read the old aquatic study from 2015 and my questions are, well, you know, I know COVID got in the way, but, you know, how are we doing implementing that plan, you know, as well?
Thank you, Eric. Are there any other comments or questions related to this item before we move to the next one? Okay, so next up is the civic area planning analysis and park perceptions summary. Allie, who's going to kick it over to Melanie?
Shihomi Kuriyagawa is our senior landscape architect and project manager for the most complex project on our work plan. Involves a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of coordination with city departments, and she is doing it incredibly. It's pretty sweet what other directors constantly rave about your staff.
Thank you, Ellen. So as Allie mentioned, I'm Shihomi Kuriyagawa. I'm a senior landscape architect on the project. And I am here to talk about our engagement effort and specifically summarize the feedback that we got. So let me share screen really quick. Yes, thank you for my name tag. Okay, so we are still at the very beginnings of the project for civic area. And so we kicked off in beginning of this year in 2024 with the design team, but also our first window of engagement. And so that window of engagement, we're here to review our summary and feedback. So it's kind of exciting to get to review this with you at a high level. But just to note, as we go through these different sections, we wanted to just ask Brad if you had any questions on the process for window 1, if you had any questions generally for the feedback as we move through, and then of course, anything else that we should keep in mind. We're in the middle of planning for window 2 right now, so we kind of had a quick turnaround. We're back at it. So let us know at the end. I'll go through this presentation as quickly as possible, and then we'll get to any questions. So The overview of window one engagement really was from the start of February to April. So we had 3 months to go out to the community with several different events that we did throughout multiple locations of the city, including the park itself. But in general, we asked these kind of 4 high-level questions on what do you envision doing in the civic area? What are your top values and priorities that will help inform civic area phase 2? So this is just coming off of the phase 1 that we opened in 2018, excuse me. What are your top concerns for this area? And how would you like to connect to civic area through the Arboretum? So we're kind of talking about bigger questions on visioning for the next future phase. This slide just highlights all of the work that we've done. So 13 engagements in those 3 months. We did a community feedback and family concert event. So that was our bigger our bigger public engagement. And that was centered around youth and family and general public. We did have an online questionnaire as well, both in English and in Spanish. We also included a lot of pictures throughout just to help with any language barriers in general. We had 6 historically excluded focus groups where we're really trying to prioritize certain community members, making sure that they're coming along in the process with us in design. 2 student groups, so that included CU and of course Boulder High throughout window 1 engagement. And then we had some fun dynamic events in terms of some pop-up locations. So that was in the library, in the Agewell Center, among some other locations. So we've been busy out to various parts of the community and definitely focused on equity. And with that equity is part of the process. So you'll notice here, these next slides are what we've dove into in specific detail. We're not necessarily going to go into specific detail of each engagement event, but this is just a sampling or example. So for racial equity, you'll notice that we have a Spanish first meeting, equity focus group, and specific demographics taken from the online questionnaire. This is some of the highlights that we have from what we heard in terms of what's priority, community recreation and play, welcoming inclusivity and multicultural space. So you can start to see as we go out to these certain groups and specific events, you can start to see all the juiciness that people are talking about. Areas with tables and chairs to share food and connect with children, friends, and family. So starting to really see what people want out of this space. In terms of the disability equity, we worked closely with people experiencing physical and sensory disabilities with our Roll and Stroll group, CPWD, and also our stakeholder group. So specific to this group was universal access, really creative thoughts around design and lowering barriers to entry, but not only barriers for access or circulation, talking about play, talking about the importance to connect to outdoor recreation and how we get all different kinds of folks those opportunities and access to recreation throughout the space. You can also see over here, we'll get into it a little further down, but we asked people the guiding principles of our park plan. There are 7, just to start to prioritize what they thought should be top of mind as we think about design for phase 2. So we've gone through and seen all of the feedback from across the city, what priorities are floating to the top. So then also part of this focus group was the youth equity, and just knowing that young people have more barriers for getting their voice out, being heard, being a part of government process in general. And so working with Boulder High was a wonderful event. We had an art gallery of all the wonderful ideas and creative design that the students were coming up with. We've also worked with CU as well on multiple proposals of what they see throughout the site. And we're going to be working this summer on a temporary pop-up installation with some of the CU students. So we can kind of see that come to life, and that will help with part of the engagement that we'll be doing for next year. Okay, so that's in general brief process on what it took to get through window one and make sure we're trying to hear as many voices as possible. And what we've actually heard, I'll get into the summary for Civic. At the top above the line are those guiding principles that I mentioned before. So again, going back and asking the public, we have this existing park plan. Here are the guiding principles that start to create the framework. What are the priorities here? Below the line, you'll start to see some more detail on the themes that emerged within those principles. So people really talking about how to activate the space, for instance. So seeing all of the different ideas of how to activate the space, what people want to see throughout the space, connecting to outdoors and the like, especially with life and property safety, to different themes starting to emerge. So here you can see at a higher level the key findings. So on the left, we have entire Boulder community feedback. On the right, we've pulled out historically excluded groups to highlight that specific feedback. And you can see right off the bat, it's actually pretty synonymous with each other. So place for community activity and arts, people want to see the space activated. They want to go to civic area and just immediately be a part of an event, connect with people, see a neighbor, and kind of quickly be sucked into something engaging. Outdoor culture and nature, Civic Heart of Boulder, life, property, and safety, you can see floated to the top of our priorities of the top 4. And then everything else sort of comes to the backside. That does not mean that we won't incorporate design for sustainable, viable future, enhanced access, and celebration of history. Those principles will come along with us throughout design, of course. We're just noting what is floating to the top for the public. Interestingly enough, historically excluded groups, that civic heart flips above outdoor culture and nature. The civic heart principle talks a lot around equity, inclusivity, celebration of culture. And so I think that makes sense. That actually bumps up higher for our focus groups. Sorry about that. This just expands a little bit of those principles, our guiding principles, and you can see some of the themes that start to emerge again between the entire Boulder community and the historically excluded groups. Still very similar, but yes, you can see people are starting to talk about community recreation. So people are talking about recreation specifically to connect with each other, talking about play. A lot of art and music events in general. I just want to show up to an event again. That was of interest. Boulder is known for its wonderful outdoor features and amenities, including Boulder Creek. And so not a surprise that outdoor culture and nature was pretty high there.
We did hear, didn't we, about the size of the event spaces?
Yeah, the size of the event spaces really do matter. And not only the size, but also, again, some of those barriers. So permitting, expensive permitting, the system. So really providing different types of spaces for rental, for community benefit, and to really take over their own events. Maybe even looking at the band shell to how to program that more for high school support and poetry slams or rock concerts, things like that. So different sized events, different ways to rent and permit, maybe not permit all the time, maybe more for professional groups, but we've heard a lot of feedback on that. Thank you for adding. And then I just wanted to bring this up. We know that safety in general is really top of mind for a lot of people in the civic area. We separated this from the top 3 priorities, although it's coming up very close to the rest of the priorities. Really, this is something that design cannot solve on its own. We know it's going to take design, space activation, policy, work with other partnerships, our SAMPS team, our urban rangers to really create a safe and welcoming space. But you can really see the concerns here to have the space feel safe. Again, I've heard a lot from the community that really At one time, this had been a wonderful, safe place. And then, we've had so many things kind of come along. And so really wishing that the space felt safe for families, really talking around the unsocial behaviors of illegal activity. And so this will be key in window 2. We're going to go back out to the community and just talk about what are those unsocial behaviors that you see the most? What are the social behaviors and the values that we want to really prop up and get behind? So.
Let me pause on this for just a sec.
Sure.
We're clearly talking about the unhoused population that congregates in this area, right?
Well, I would say not only, there's a lot of vandalism happens from all different user groups, but I would keep it to unsocial behavior specifically towards drug use, vandalism, and sanitary conditions.
Okay, so do we have data that helps us understand how large of a problem that is?
I think what we're doing right now is collecting data between our operations team who's out there a lot of the time working with the urban rangers as well as our police department. So we do have some historical data on that. As well as, starting this engagement process has been really wonderful in terms of gaining park perception, what people are really feeling when they're using the space.
If you're asking questions about actual crime data, we do have it. And the police department takes a very solution-oriented crime approach where they target areas that are specifically pervasive, and this is one of them. There are regularly, mostly it is members of the unhoused community who are victims of crimes, of physical crimes, but there are a lot of challenges, and we're working closely with the police department to address them to make sure it's safe for everyone.
So, like this, I'm gonna make those far beyond parks, but we in the city have a tendency to push the unhoused population around, and that I think leads to more crime, not less, as that community loses any stability they may have. So again, this goes beyond your work, Xiaomi, but I'd love to understand, like, what are we doing with other city departments to ensure that, like, we're taking care of those people who live in our city, while also thinking about how we're going to create this safe, welcoming space in our civic center.
It was last year's retreat where you all got an overview on the Safe and Managed Public Spaces program, and then the housing approach.
Right.
And the close partnership we have with what was both the Boulder Shelter for Homeless and now All Roads. We can certainly put that on an agenda to be calendared. It is complex, but the city is doing a lot and spending tens of millions of dollars and more than any other city to try and get people into housing, and we would love to talk more about that.
And we did, as an example, one of the groups reached out with was, I think it did, the nonprofit Bridge House, which the city employs staff, it provides housing. So that was one of the groups was part of the conversation, understand needs and how can we be more proactive in that regard. So you're right, it's two-sided coin, supporting all community members, but also identifying what are unsocial behaviors that are unacceptable for while taking care of, like, working with folks like Bridge House. So we're doing our best to cover both sides there.
And what's nice to hear too from the community feedback, definite concern about the space and feeling safe in the space. We did also hear feedback about the humanitarian side and making sure we're taking care of the population and not moving people around needlessly. We are trying to walk that line through our coexistent model that we're applying onto this design process on how to be absolutely welcoming and inclusive and sort of walk the line of safety.
Thanks.
Yeah, did you have a question?
You had mentioned that like sanitation concerns were part of the safety experience. And just like I have observed that kind of the strategy has been to like remove bathrooms, public bathrooms that were available. So I think when you remove a place for people to go to the bathroom and to manage sanitation, you're going to get an unsanitary situation because people are not going to stop going to the bathroom.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you for that comment. We are working in civic area also across our park systems and looking at some of the better systems that we can implement for restrooms. They are definitely something that we're thinking about in terms of operations. They themselves get vandalized quite a bit. And so it's really, what is the best system that we're looking into? And we're doing research across Civic, Pearl Street, as well as other parks. Civic is a specific beast in that it's very hard because of the high hazard, really to work within the boundary of the floodplain and what is allowed, to be buildable and, a structure within that floodplain. So it's pretty hard to get around, but we are going to, we recognize that challenge and we're gonna incorporate it in this. Sanitation for restrooms is definitely a key concern. Sanitation also for, Boulder Creek itself. Finding trash, even needles, as well as what we've heard, and keeping, just a level of stewardship, for the creek and the space.
I think it would be interesting to see some guidelines for the city, like if you have a certain number, like there are parks that don't, or if they're gonna have picnic or eating areas there, that there's gonna be bathrooms, cause like around Elks Park, there's like picnic tables for 100 people, but there's no bathrooms. So I just think it's like a mismatch.
Yes. For the key findings of the recreation activities, this is a little bit different, right, than our priorities, our guiding principle priorities. But you can see, again, floating to the top is programming what people want. It's a smaller text font on the bottom, so sorry about that. I'll just read. But under the guise of programming, people have talked about community programming. So again, really wanting to engage, meet neighbors, be out, seen and be seen. Music events came up a lot, youth programming, the farmers market, probably not a surprise, very well loved. And how do we expand the farmers market, make it more permanent, make it seasonal, or year round? And then just generally attending any kind of event would be great to see from what we've heard from people. You can see that playing, eating, dining, and picnicking, observing nature, experiencing art, gathering with friends and family was at the top for all of the Boulder community. And again, very similar for historically excluded groups along almost the same lines. Eating and dining flips up, and that is because we heard, I think, a lot of these stories around eating as a communal activity, as family and friend connection. So that was really at the heart of some of that feedback. And then dancing was added to for historically excluded communities. So that was our brief summary. We will be putting online on our project website something similar to this graphic summary. It's a little bit longer, so you can see a little bit more detail there. But for next steps, really, we are finalizing site analysis with the design team. So now that we have engagement feedback, the design team has been working very tirelessly on a lot of technical site analysis. We'll marry that with all of the policy overlay that we have in this area. So there's quite a bit of parameter that we have to think about before we even get to design. You can see that will kick off next year. So still a lot of moving parts to get through, but we'll be back to the public and to PRAB in window 2 to share out one, really what the window 1 findings are. So that's more, we've done that now, but we're doing that with the public. We like to share that out and confirm. Did we miss anything? Also make sure that any voices that we missed from window 1 get a chance to speak on the priorities for guiding principles in window 2. As I mentioned, again, we are discussing that park perceptions and acceptable park behavior. And then also looking at the programming and space activation. So we've kind of gone through some of the principles, the space activation, recreation activities. So we'll start to actually put some bubble diagramming to that. So that is the look for window 1 engagement for civic area. And I'll just pop it back to PRAB for questions. Yes, Jenny.
Do you have have you looked at any other cities that you're interested in modeling?
Yes. And before I answer, sorry, are you talking about any specific one thing, Boulder Creek or Civic Center?
I mean, it's such a diverse area. Like, it just seems like with the bookends and then already having the library and working with the flood problems, like it seems super unique. So I wonder if there is another city that you could, or have you looked at that may be similar?
Yeah, we're doing a precedent study currently with our design team. We're looking at not only the different types of facilities, space activation, the governance on how to really run these types of urban spaces that have so many components to them. Cary Park is one of them that we're looking at currently. Some of these spaces too are different scale, but Clyde Warren is a great example. Specific elements within civic area, you know, I think Golden and Clear Creek has done a wonderful job with their creek system and activating a water trail. But we're kind of looking all over the country for that.
Will that, some of that information be included in the phase 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then my other question is I find it so interesting because I hear all the time that people are looking for community engagement and, you know, a place to go and meet people and, you know, some of the larger events aside, I've gone down to like 13th Street for some downtown Boulder partnership stuff, and it's just really low, like low attendance. And I wonder if, like, how do you fix that problem? I mean, is it a marketing issue? Is it the type of events? Because Boulder Creek Fest does well and the farmers market does well, you know, like those regularly scheduled events people can count on. So when you're looking at that being the top thing people want, how do you address it?
Did you want to start? Okay. I would say that we got some really great feedback from the Boulder Social Streets plan that we ran last year. So really activating or trying to activate 13th Street there. We got really interesting feedback in how to program specifically 13th Street. And really what we heard was something that is very similar to the farmer's market in scheduled. It happens reoccurring at a time on a day that I know I can show up is a lot easier to track. And of course, you know, a farmer's market is such a bigger event, but they have a lot of partnerships. So partnership is the key, right? I think Boulder Social Streets was such a quick plan and prototype to implement. We were a little bit kind of constrained on the amount of vendors that we could partner with in creating something a little bit more robust. So that I would say is probably another key factor. Honestly, everything that you mentioned, and then the marketing is always key. So it's kind of a, yes, we need to do all of those things a little bit more robustly and also be centered, have some synergy with Pearl Street. So we got some feedback that, you know, Pearl Street has so much going on. What can we really do to complement in that area down by Civic and not take away?
Great, thank you.
Just to back up a step, does phase 2 include the Arboretum?
Yes, it does. We are looking at key connections to the Arboretum and how we really do some implementation in the near term on it, but really think visionary about that connection.
Okay.
Can I just add to that? That's that point, isn't it? Where the concept plan will cover the whole space. And it gets back to the earlier point, doesn't it? But you look at the fish pond and then the multi-use path, all these things that were added, sort of, it's never been designed as a civic space. So civic space will activate it. So the concept plan will provide that knitted framework. But the reality is we've got $80 million. So we'll have to decide where do we focus that money. That'll be a key part of the discussion. Knowing that the concept plan will help us figure out what the funding needs are for the other spaces we can't fund in phase 2.
Okay, so if we're getting into visionary thinking, just want to put an idea into there. Have we ever considered purchasing some of the properties along Broadway, the east side of Broadway, and adding it to the park?
You're raising a good question where when the plan was, do you want me to? Yeah, when the original plan focused on east and sort of west, it wasn't really looking to the south, especially with Arboretum, and like Alfalfa's is empty at the moment. It would, and a lot of the business community said that the businesses and the shops have sort of turned their back on the park. So how do we ever need to face the park again? I mean, by connectivity. And so, yes, as those conversations start to occur, how do we think about that bigger picture of revitalizing it? So it's a great question.
Jordy, I just want to make sure we're clear that the Arboretum was also part of this window of engagement.
Yeah.
Specific, oh, okay, good. I just want to make sure.
But you're raising such good questions where the governance piece and the partnerships that start to emerge here would be key to activating this space like other civic areas across the US and frankly Europe.
Which properties are you?
Well, like there's like there's a couple of things, several empty storefronts that are on the east side of Broadway between like Arapahoe and yeah. Well, Arapahoe and,
So like
University-
on the side
University
between the high school and Broadway?
right,
Okay.
right.
And then your point's that simple, like at the minute, most of the shop fronts face Broadway, it's a busy street, not very pleasant.
And some of them are not currently occupied.
And if you face the Arboretum path, which is suddenly an attractive path at some point with outdoor cafes and stuff, you've got a much better business venture. So there's some things to talk through as we get into this.
And I just, if we're throwing things out into there, and I'm not sure of the actual plan for the municipal building, if when everybody moves up to Alpine Balsam, but that's a city-owned building that I don't know if there's any plans for. I would love to see a youth focus, something happening. Just because I think that it would be a nice place to have centralized location for kids and considering what Ally said earlier about low programming for kids. I mean, we have issues with the night rides and the North Boulder Park, and not that it would make it better or worse, I'm not necessarily saying, but there is not a lot of space for teens. So I think a youth area would be great in a building that's already owned by the city. So that's just an idea to throw into.
No, that's great. And we are looking at that idea, especially as we balance that Alpine Balsam campus. So a lot of the city buildings within Civic that have staff will be moving over to that campus. And so there's ample opportunity for exactly what you're talking
I
about.
should mention that Boulder High and CU.
Oh, yeah. And so when we worked with Boulder High, we had wonderful charrettes with the art students over there and working with their gallery and coming up with some prototype and sketches. But we heard some really great ideas on a youth cafe, a coffee shop, something that's a little bit more affordable and welcoming. And, you know, you're able to be there and loiter to really feel welcomed. So I'm excited because some of the students talked about, well, some kids have after school programs and some kids just go home. And then there are those of us who have nowhere to go. Can we find this third place and really embrace that in the civic area? So we thought that was just a wonderful idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that I think that related to the Arboretum and that connector space between the upper part of the hill and downtown, I think that CU, Boulder, BBSD and the city should be working in tandem on that project. And I mean sharing resources too, because all three of those entities have a massive incentive to make sure that that space is thriving. Especially with the university's new conference center. I feel like there's a lot of space for collaboration there, and I hope that the city is pushing that.
I want to just build on that because these folks won't celebrate it, but I want to just recognize already the Arboretum is having just a, I don't know the right word, polish, brush up, whatever you want to say. The design team has been actually out, you know, doing their own sweat equity and team building to clean up some of the beds. We know the importance of the connectivity between the hill and downtown. Someone asked a question about that at a meeting and wanted to hear more about that. It came up with the trees. And now I'm trying to remember if I ever sent that follow-up information to you. It's been a very busy summer. But if you were to walk the Arboretum right now, you would see wayfinding signage that says you're here. Pearl Street is 5-minute walk or, you know, a 2-minute bike. The hill is this way. So wayfinding has been installed through a partnership with Community Vitality and the Downtown Boulder Partnership. CU has been a part of that. So there's already the partnership, the collaboration is happening around what makes sense to do on a short term. It's always, this team does a lovely job of saying, Ally, that's great. That doesn't make sense. We're gonna, you know, we're working on a visionary design here. We're gonna make the whole space better and spend a lot of time and money. But what can we do in the short term to make that connection better, safer, so that as these hundreds of people start showing up at the conference center and the Hill Hotel, they come spend money downtown.
I suggested, I know this is like picturing that the alfalfa space be like, use something like that's community centric rather than just like another
Like a youth adventure bank.
or something like that that's not really engaging. I'd like to see an endorsement facility there just because of the closeness to Boulder High, and I think it's something that could really kind of bring community members there rather than just like tourists that are passing through or kind of other buildings that don't really engage with community but don't.
Oh, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great plan. It's what we need down there, but you know, I think you know, the safety thing is huge. I live in that area. I've been through the Arboretum with my kids, you know, I go to the fishing pond and I'm at Ebengee a lot, and the camps along the creek, the drug use, those are huge issues. And like, I'm not sure where the city is now with the recent Supreme Court decision about enforcing the camping ban. But, you know, and I'm hopefully by the time we start to initiate this civic plan, we'll have dealt with that. But we, you know, we need to take care of our unhoused people. But we also need to enforce this camping ban and clean up our downtown. I mean, since I've moved here, I've only been in Boulder 5 years, but I've seen a significant decline in public safety down there. And I think we're gonna spend a lot of money improving this. We can't really beat around the bush about that.
And Eric, I appreciate that response, and all I would say is, you're right, it's a really tough issue, not the only city. And part of this effort is, you know, in the past, and frankly, some of Ali's leadership here was we might have just done a design plan and then did the ribbon cutting. Hopefully you're noticing here that we're looking at space activation even before the design's finished.
Mhm.
Along with the placemaking, and then also looking at what is this idea of rules and regulations. And then how does that fit in with the operations of the space? So those 4 quadrants, you can actually see in that bottom left diagram, we're analyzing all the time across the board with the different groups we work with. So that we don't have the perfect answer yet, but we're really trying to think of it in that way. So it isn't just putting in and trying to figure it out. And so we've got 2 years to work that through, and the more feedback we get, the better, frankly. And we'll all be in it together to try and figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this item? Great. All right, so that concludes the staff presentation portion of the meeting. The next item is matters from the board.
Oh, wait, Mr. Chair, I wonder if we could propose just maybe a 2-minute bathroom break and reset. I'm gonna so we've got a bunch of staff that are
Yeah,
gonna
yeah. Sure.
dismiss, and rather than be disruptive to your conversation, if we could just take a quick movement break, bathroom break. For folks who, I know we've been here a few times, but bathrooms are right out the hall.
Yeah, let's come back at
Not sure
8:25.
about the
It's
chair.
8:25.
Watch the chairs as you try and sneak out of the bathroom. mean, I was in Seattle at this parks conference, and it's really a downtown and urban parks conference, and you're all back together. I'm happy to talk. I want to make sure you have time for your matters, but
Yeah, no, I actually think we should probably build in that 5-minute break between staff presentation and matters from the board for every meeting, unless there's like no.
well, I mean, just for you, I am constantly telling people, like, I know Mark got home at 1 o'clock in the morning, that he had a death, he was in Utah. Scott has a 5 a.m. flight, he's taking a vacation, and they won't leave. They feel rude, and so part of it is me also trying to like
No, I think that's a
let
great.
them all feel like we all respect, and lots of them want to stay and hear your conversation, but I know that they're all gonna work, you know, way too much this week, so thank you for supporting
Yeah,
their.
no, I think it's a good natural transition. Okay, so reconvening the meeting, if it ever was not convened or whatever. Back from break. We have a couple of items, the first of which is the PRAB meeting dates that are coming up in the fall. So I'll just get to the easy one first, which is the November and December meeting dates. Those fall on holidays or either actual holidays or school holidays. And staff have proposed, the agenda setting team has proposed that we move the November meeting to Monday, November 18th, which is a week before it's currently set, and then the December meeting from like Christmas to December 16th. So we are, the agenda setting team, which is me, Bernie, and Ally, have proposed these dates. Does anybody have any issue with those dates?
What are they again? I'm sorry.
So they're in the, if you look at page 322 of the, it's like third or second from the last page. It's Monday, November 18th is the November meeting proposal, and then Monday, December 16th is the December meeting proposal. Is there any issue with those dates among those present? Okay, so let's go ahead and change those. Thank you so much, Rosa, in advance for doing that. The next issue there has to do with the study session / retreat. The reminder, this is like a step back opportunity for the PRAB to just chat about various things that are really just have to do with our governance and also just BPR business. And that is typically spearheaded by 2 PRAB members. And those 2 PRAB members are typically not in leadership. And it's a really great opportunity for members, new or seasoned, to take a leadership role to help spearhead the agenda, which typically can be just a blank slate. Like, what are you interested in talking about? And so one thing we want to do tonight is talk about whether we want to have that meeting this fall versus like in January or February. And if we want to have the meeting this fall, we got to start planning for it soon. Because it does take a month or 2 to kind of get things moving on that. And we want to coordinate, we want to make sure that the agenda is run by staff in case they have to provide content for the study session, which is always fabulous. So first item there is, do we want to have the discussion in the fall versus like January or February? I would personally propose that we stick with the fall, because I think it's a good chance for us to step back for the new folks to come together with all of us and just like not have a set agenda from staff, but like to set our own agenda and to talk about items that we want to talk about. It's a PRAB driven agenda. And it's also a chance for us to just kind of get to know each other a little better. So I think that we should do it in the fall. The problem with doing it in the fall is like November and December are really busy. And so it would typically have to be like in October or something, or in November in addition to the November meeting. And that's always kind of tough. So I open that up for discussion with the recommendation that we do it in the fall at some point.
I agree.
Thoughts?
October since.
Good, because when is our October meeting set for?
I believe October 23rd.
Great. And so
28.
28th. That's even better, because then we can maybe set it for earlier in October. Have we done it before where we've done like in a week before the regular meeting? We've done that before, right? Yeah,
You've done the week before. I mean, you've done it whenever you can get a critical mass of folks.
okay.
We did it last February, like.
We did it February right before the regular meeting, right? Okay. So could we then send out a doodle poll for dates in October?
Okay.
That'd be awesome. And just,
You want to propose like limiting it to Mondays in October?
yeah, be ideal to do Mondays. Yeah,
We'll pull for the 14th and 21st, if that's okay. The 7th is part.
14th is Columbus Day. So it is.
Indigenous Peoples' Day, that's a holiday, thank you. That, the 7th is our national conference, which if my presence is required, I'll be at our national conference. So that leaves the 21st. Thank you so much for flagging that so quickly. So we can just pull that one date unless you want to expand about our dates. And it's also, I mean, my attendance isn't mandatory. I'd love to be there. That's,
I would like you to be there. You're gonna be probably presenting something or wanting to address topics, and you're an indispensable member of the
And
extension.
the 21st works for me.
It works for me too.
Works for me too.
It's the day after my 43rd birthday, so we just have to celebrate that.
no,
Maybe I'll bring cake.
what is your favorite kind of cake, Elliot?
Just regular Safeway cake, just like, you know, fluffy vanilla cake with frosting.
I agree.
Just bring it, yeah, that's what I like.
I like Safeway's Trace Leche's cake.
I love that too.
All right, so October 21st, I'll look for a location and I will advise.
Eric, does that work for you, the 21st, or does that not work for you?
No, it works. Can you explain this study session thing a little bit more?
Yeah.
Can you provide like, what did you guys talk about last time? Or like, what's the goals here? Is it just to
Yeah,
discuss
So it-
topics, or are we presentations, or is there, what goes into these things?
yeah, so good question. The nature of it is essentially, I would say the two goals are, we want to get to know each other more as a board, and then two, we want to address topics that concern us as a board. And that could be topics that we want staff to present on. So in the past, we had a whole presentation on how much money and what are the resources being put into public safety issues and park rangers and you know, keeping the bike paths clear and that kind of thing. And we've done team building exercises and just done, you know, various activities to get to know each other. But it's an opportunity for us to also talk about how we, you know, how do we address items from the board or matters from the board? How do we improve that? How do we make sure that we're all bringing our opinions and our ideas to the fore as a group in a structure that's not staff driven? So like staff are driving the agenda for the meetings typically, because they're bringing us the things that we need to hear about. And the retreat is an opportunity for the board to drive the agenda. Like, what do we want to talk about? What are things that we feel like we as a group need to discuss to make things more efficient, to make things more transparent, fair, related to our business?
Or also just to better understand issues that we may be curious about.
Yeah.
Got it. So it's to improve our operating procedures a little bit. Is that what I'm hearing?
It could be. So like, you know, one agenda item I'd like to discuss this year is this matters from the board agenda item. When do we have it in the meeting? Do we move it up? Do we change the format? Are there ways to improve the way that we are prompting each other to share opinions or thoughts about park matters? Are there norms that we need to discuss about, like, you know, group conversations? There are all sorts of things we can talk about that kind of come up in the course of meetings that we need to address as a group.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think my initial thoughts are like with the prep, it's like, it's very hard to have these conversations with you all because everything has to be, you know, you can't CC anybody. So I feel very isolated that like we meet once a month, but there's no communication during the month that we can have, you know, and that I'm trying to understand how that works with this open records law, I guess it is, right? But
Yeah.
it does feel like we could be doing a better job of, I'm trying to work around that, but I don't see how there is ways to work around that and still be collaborative here without just, you know, every month we get together. I would like, you know, there's not this dialogue with you others that I would like.
Yeah, that's a great point, and we should raise that. We should talk about that. I would note that you are okay to talk with an individual other member of the PrAB at any time. It's just if you have 3 people talking, that's a meeting.
Yeah, I just think that
Saying
that's,
it's like you want to
you
have.
know,
the whole
I've
group.
never come across that in anywhere in my life. And it just seems so bizarre, you know,
Yeah,
to
and
be
if
on
you're
a
on a
working
state
board and not
commission-
have conversations with other board members, you know, more than one. You know,
Yeah, and we're lucky. If we were on a state commission, which I've been on before, you can't talk to anybody. Because that's a meeting. Like you can't talk to one other person.
it
Like I
just seems
couldn't
so
call you after the meeting.
counterproductive to me, honestly. It just seems really counterproductive to be
I know.
doing this role. It seems very hindering and kind of you know, a little bit, so,
So we should talk about ways to work around that
yeah.
friction in a way that would prompt collaboration. I think that'd be a good item. But anyway, that's the kind of.
Okay, got it.
I'm sorry.
How do we set it?
So the agenda is set by the people who organize it.
Okay,
In concert with leadership.
Okay.
So we have to pick who wants to run this retreat.
I'll do it.
Okay, so we got 1 volunteer. Thank you so much. I was gonna volunteer you anyway, but so thank you for
Yeah.
prompting that. So Jenny needs a friend. And you did this last year, right? Okay, so you're off the hook. Anna, have you helped organize the? Okay, so you're a candidate. Have you helped organize?
I haven't, and I would like to. if-
Okay.
Unless I'm gonna already have my say as a vice chair.
I think that having you do it with Jenny makes sense because then you can be the bridge to leadership.
Great.
And then we don't have to have this like separate discussion.
Okay.
Okay, I like that.
Great.
So the 2 of you can spearhead the agenda. We can share with you past agendas.
Okay,
We can't like all meet about it necessarily, but you guys can talk about like what you think would be a good agenda topics, and then you can bring that to our agenda setting or whatnot. And we can talk about like what resources we need from staff to actually make it happen.
great.
And I guess I would also just say that if anyone else on PrAB has thoughts about what they might like to see discussed, why don't you email that to me or to Jenny, not to both of us at the same time, but just to one of us, and then Jenny and I will meet, just the 2 of us, and we'll discuss.
I just offer a process thing to Eric's point. You all can forage for ideas. You'll have a business meeting before then, when you'll all be together, where you could have a matter from the board to finalize retreat topics so that you can all discuss it together. So at your September meeting, it'd be very appropriate to have a draft retreat agenda that the board could, as a group, discuss.
Yep.
Okay,
But our September meeting comes very close to retreat
right.
date, so.
Well, that comes to another proposal, just as far as for your August meeting, well, I'll get there when we get to the retreat. Or sorry, the August or
You mean the field trip?
the field trip. So as an option, so your current schedule, the next item on this is the field trip schedule. Regina and I chatted, we agree this Wonderland encroachment, it's a very big and a very important conversation. We were putting it before this meeting to keep things moving along. We're eager to put this to bed, but we're eager to do it right, which is why we've been so thoughtful about it. We could push that to September. You could keep this as scheduled and you could do a retreat pep over dinner. You'd have to convene as an official meeting from 5:30 to 6, but you could have a retreat conversation in that 5:30 to 6 window if you like. So we show up at Tate, you've got a box dinner, you convene an official meeting, you talk about the retreat, and then you hop on a bus. That gives you more time rather than waiting till September.
Yeah, why don't we?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, good idea. Okay. Rosa, do you mind reminding me to add that to the agenda for
Okay,
August?
Yep.
Thank you.
and we meet on Thursday anyway.
Oh, right.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I mean, can you help remind me to talk about it on Thursday?
Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
thank you.
And while we're on it, just because I have it on top of my mind, I was really happy to hear the topic brought up about the collaboration between PrAB or Parks and Rec and BDSD when it's talking about the Arboretum and that whole area there, and it's long been my thing to talk about it as far as South Boulder goes and South Boulder Rec and the high school and the middle school all being right there. So I don't know if that's something that we could like just address a little bit or talk about, like what are the hurdles between the collaboration between BVSD and Parks and Rec, or
And yeah.
how can we use Jason or our connections that we have to make that happen? I just feel like that's just one of those obvious, in my mind, it's so obvious, and it's what's keeping us from doing more of that? And I don't know whether that's a policy thing or, admin thing, or it's a just brainstorming.
Like in that case, would we request for the actual study session, a representative from the school board to come talk to us? Like, is that something that we could do? Or, like, who presented about the safety thing last time?
So I think I'm gonna speak directly to the way Sunny phrased that, and that you're perceiving a barrier to collaboration. I don't share that concern. I think we have an incredible partnership with the Boulder Valley School District. We have a very strong joint use agreement. That the barrier is funding and prioritization, and that we don't have money to do all the things. And so I just want to be clear. I don't know that the right solution, it would be appropriate first to talk about. I mean, you all just reviewed the budget and the CIP, that project, so to me, the right conversation isn't necessarily BVSD and BPR collaboration. It's project prioritization and funding.
My question was more generic, like, would it be, if we had a topic, would we bring in people to talk about them? Or is it just us and you mostly? I'm just like the study sessions for council is always like tons of people come in with information.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about, right?
It's been both. For the, when we talked about safe and managed public spaces, I can't remember if we presented or if we had someone from HHS talk about the network of services and the outreach and the thing. And then we also talked about the way that we're trying to balance, with that anyway. So there was a staff presentation to Bernie's, or I think Elliot said, sometimes there's a topic that just hasn't come up in the course of business, but that you all want to know more about and discuss. And so I would think as you all submit topics for discussion, you should be clear on the interest, right? And I'm just gonna, I'm big on being very clear about interest versus positions. And I'm just going to use this example if that's okay. So interest-based bargaining, if folks are familiar with that. So the classic example, my two sons, Bernie and Elliot, they're fighting over an orange. Their position is they want an orange. And so I say, and I cut it in half and I give them both an orange, and neither are happy because their position was Elliot's starving. He hasn't eaten all day and he wants an orange. And Bernie's making potpourri. He could have been happy with the peel. Like when you learn people's interest, there's a solution. And I say that to say Sunny's interest is that park get renovated in collaboration and be more actively used by the students. I would make your suggestions interest-based versus positions-based, because that opens the door to solutions, right? Like, so.
Yeah, like my interest is that we get Crab and BVSD in a room to brainstorm and create a vision that really is bigger than prioritizing individual projects. Like, I agree with you that the hurdle is money and prioritization, but if there's a shared vision, that could stimulate some seed money. That could be a passion project for somebody who can relate to that on a level that's like more moving than we need to do these little individual projects. That's the way I feel. Is that I like to see big picture. I like to see how you can get people's emotions involved in decision making, because I feel like it's not all numbers. I don't think a lot of people are moved by numbers and prioritizing a lot of times. I feel like when people get involved in the vision and the, really imagining how this is going to affect people and the big changes it's going to make, then it's more exciting, and then there's just more focus, more talk, more whatever. I don't know. That's the way I see it. So I don't know if this is the right place for that, but I want there to be more exchange of ideas and more. I want us all to know that we are all on the same page and how can we support each other.
So maybe it'd be helpful to learn from Ally about the joint use agreement that exists.
And beyond that, yes, what does it look like to partner with BVSD? It would be beyond the PRAP's role to ask BVSD to come to the table and sit down in a room, because that assumes that is the city's largest, to talk about South Boulder. That would assume that is the
Well, I'm
city.
talking South Boulder, Central Boulder too. Like if there's an idea that safety concerns, youth engagement, like it's all happening in the same space. And so if individual organizations are currently trying to solve the problem separately, then I can see why it becomes a financial issue and it becomes lower priority because there are other things that can be managed easier maybe, or solved easier or with less money. I don't know. I don't understand it well enough, which is why I want to like.
To the
understand it.
retreat topic, I think it would be posing your interest and letting the retreat committee, and we can talk about the best way to achieve that interest. Because with Bernie's, with this one, yes, I do think the best first step would be a background on existing city BVSD relations and how things work, how topics are prioritized for city coordination. Right now, I'm so thrilled. And in September, we're opening, a manufacturing facility for building modular housing at BSD's Ed Center. It's amazing. So I just want to be clear, there's a really great partnership with the city and with BVSD, and that foundation would be a good place to start. And then the board part of the conversation would be, okay, what do we do with that? Is this a priority, discussing this? And, I can help with how does that work within the bounds of the PRAB's role, within the bounds of our role and purview as city staff. Love it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for volunteering.
Sure.
Really appreciate it, both of you. You can start chatting whenever you want about proposed agenda. We'll obviously have our planning meeting on Thursday, so we can talk more about downloading what we talked about today and some of the ideas, but the two of you can feel free to drive the agenda.
Okay.
And it typically starts with an icebreaker type activity, and then we move into discussions that pertain to board specific stuff, like how do we govern ourselves better, more efficiently? How do we engage in the meeting better? And then also, staff presented guided stuff, like what do we want to hear from them or other city people? And it's important to make sure that we provide staff with a heads up if we want them to present information to us, or we want them to get some other staff member from the city.
Yeah.
Kind of to your point about city council meetings, just in advance so they can plan around it.
Great.
So thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, the second item has to do with PRAB agenda setting. So this really just has to do with in the last few meetings, we've had some questions about how do we as a group suggest items for the agenda. And there are a couple ways you can do that. One is you can raise it in the meeting. So at the time of the meeting when we're discussing an item, if you want to add something to the agenda, or if you want to talk about something more, you can propose that in the meeting, and then the agenda setting team, so Ally and Scott and me and Bernie, we will talk about that in our agenda setting meeting and decide if and where we can put something on the agenda. You can also email me or Bernie separately, or me and Ally together, or just Ally, and you can suggest, here's an item I would like to talk about. That will then be brought to the agenda setting team. Keep in mind that our agenda setting meeting happens the Thursday after the Monday meeting. So you effectively have 3 days after the meeting to email or suggest something. You can also just call me or text me about it. Or Bernie, right. So those are the ways you can add an item to the agenda, and just be conscious of timing. All right, the field trip / meeting in August. We have a proposed schedule for that. By the way, this field trip is great. It's one of my favorite parts of being on PRAB each year is to do this field trip. So I really look forward to it. I'm sure you'll enjoy it as well. But we've proposed a start time of 5:30 to 6. Because there needs to be an initial business meeting at the beginning. And we've just added an item to that with the discussion of the retreat agenda. And that means that dinner would be served from 5 to 5:30. And what we do is we have boxed meals that are prepared for us to take with us or just to eat there. So come earlier than you typically would, but it's important that we get started early because this will last the entire time. And we want to make sure that people can leave when there's some daylight left.
Yeah, I was just gonna offer sunset on this date is at 7:40 PM and typically there's enough sunlight to see outside for about 20 to 30 minutes after. We'll finish up inside at East, so there is some wiggle room if this time isn't tenable for you all, but just not much.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about 5:30 to 6, eat and talk, but we're gonna do 5:35 to 5:30, eat, 5:30 to 6, talk.
It's gonna be, the meeting itself is gonna be 5:30 to 6.
Okay.
The dinner will be available
Uh,
from 5 to 5:30.
But I think we don't care if you're eating from 5:30 to
Yeah,
6.
you can bring it with you.
Okay.
Some people choose not to eat that early.
Okay, okay.
Those of us with small children are like famished. 5:30,
Yeah.
want to eat, so, yeah,
We're going to East Boulder again? East Boulder?
I think so.
These are the proposed
The proposed.
locations. I'm happy to offer more about why our team selected them. If there's something missing, we can discuss that.
Yeah. So why don't we solidify that during the Thursday meeting, just make sure we know where we're going, and then.
Sure. But if any of these folks have input, we would need it now.
Yeah,
And then is there a business meeting afterwards then? Is that?
No.
So
It's
it's
still-
basically, I should block 5 to 8 for that Monday, is that right?
5 to 8:30.
We'll
Okay,
have you back at Tate 8:35.
okay,
There's a, just for folks to see, I know this packet is ginormous, on page 324 is a schedule outlined for the tour. It's also really hard, Eric, I just want to honor, if you're on a laptop and just have, well, everybody's just on a laptop and when you're virtual and have just the one screen and
yeah,
the
no, I'm
packet, it's
flipping
hard.
back and forth, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, and we are going to Wonderland Lake and Primos and Boulder Junction.
Wonderland Lake was that meeting topic, just to be clear, we're not going there, we have
We're
not
physically
proposed
going
that.
there.
No.
Okay, sorry. We're not going to Wonderland Lake. We're not gonna go, you know,
Look at
walking
people's
around.
backyards.
As much fun as that might be.
going?
We're going to
Sit on our
Primos,
table.
and Boulder Junction,
Experience.
and then we're going to East.
And East will be a Future of Rec Centers kickoff, and we want to walk with you on the land at Hogan Pentecost and share where you were. We are really hoping that we can build a whole lot
And
of
that's
this.
the area to the south, right? Okay, great. All right, and then Brad Matters. This is the time of the meeting where people get to speak their truth.
The only thing I have is that for Play Boulder, they have I've met with those wonderful people there, and there is a golf outing coming up, so feel free, it's been launched on their website, so.
What day?
So
Friday, September 13th. I know because you're also going to get an invitation. That is when we're intending to have the grand opening of this.
So if there's, you can volunteer, you can get, buy a foursome, or there's sponsorship opportunities or whatever you can do, but I'm meeting with them tomorrow, I think, or Friday, to help out a little bit more with the marketing of the event. So that's my first go at the marketing. Please feel free to attend.
Does this mean you're joining the board?
I don't know yet. Okay, we haven't gotten quite that. We're gonna get through the golf outing and then see what happens after.
And when's the potential ribbon cutting for the restaurant?
The afternoon of the 13th.
The afternoon. Okay, after the golf outing.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny.
Mhm.
Appreciate that. Anybody else want to comment on Parks and Rec related topics?
I have one. On July 4th, I rode through M&G Fine Park at like 8 in the morning, and it was nice to see the park already filling up and our staff already there being helpful and directing traffic. And then we rode back through the park around 2:30 or so, and the park was quite crowded. And again, nice to see the park being utilized. One question I had, Ally, was might we in future years on a day like that where we know the park's gonna be extremely heavily utilized, consider bringing some porta potties in? The line I saw for the bathroom was like a quarter mile long.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that feedback or request. We do have a lot of staff on site. That request hasn't made its way to us, but certainly that'd be something we'd be happy to consider.
Especially as you might assume, the women's room had a very, very long line.
I would assume that. I hadn't heard that feedback. I appreciate you passing along. And again, that's the kind of thing you're welcome to email us anytime immediately after. And we do a full after action review of major events like the 4th of July this year did go very well. I'm so proud of the work the team has done both at M&G Fine Park and the Boulder Reservoir to make sure those are family-friendly days. It's not always been like that. And I will share with the team that you had that observation. Thank you. It's easy.
Great. Any other comments, questions? Okay, next meeting is the field trip. So it starts a half hour earlier. Great meeting. We are adjourned.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Hey.